Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Arlene, can you do roll call, please?
Francis Bach,
Here.
Bill Taylor,
Here.
Rick Drew,
Here.
Brian Burns,
Present.
Jim Grimes,
Yes.
John Aldred,
Here.
Susan McGraw-Keeper,
Here.
Susan Vorpal,
Here.
Del Cullum.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to start the evening with a presentation from Dr. Chris Gobler.
Okay.
All right.
And I'll warn you now, it's a somewhat lengthy presentation, and I'll be referring to the screen here. So
Okay.
if anybody wants to adjust their position accordingly.
Oh, is there a quiz afterwards?
Say that again?
Quiz afterwards? Is there a quiz afterwards?
No quiz at the
Okay.
end, but questions welcome throughout. So, right, so this is my fourth presentation to the trustees on my annual surveying of East Hampton Town Trustee water bodies. It began in 2000, maybe it's actually the fifth, began in 2013. Some analyses came online in 14 and 15, so anyway, so happy to be here, and the presentation is going to have some introduction and background. We have some new trustees that I haven't met before, and then get into very brief methodology and then results. And so here we go. And so, as we all know, East Hampton is a beautiful place to live and has a beautiful set of coastal water bodies, both freshwater and marine water. And the fisheries of the town of East Hampton are the most prolific and abundant in the state of New York. And that's partly attributable to the fact that East Hampton is surrounded by deep and well-flushed ocean influenced water bodies, like the Atlantic Ocean and Block Island Sound and Gardner's Bay. I do a lot of water quality studies between here and New York City, and the places that often suffer from poor water quality wish they had these sorts of waters around them flushing in and out. However, within the town of East Hampton, as we're well aware, thankfully there's many areas that have been preserved and will be preserved forever. But there are also areas that are of even high and medium density residential housing and other things, historical, perhaps industrial land use, all of which can affect surface water quality.
Okay.
And so as a quick primer, a big part of what I'm going to talk about today has to do with microalgae or phytoplankton, which of course, yes, please.
Can you speak into the mic?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah, thanks.
People at home.
Thank you for saying that. Otherwise, that wouldn't be much of a presentation. So, okay. Thank you. So I'm going to talk a fair bit about microalgae. So just as a quick primer, of course, or a quick caveat so we're all on the same page, these are phytoplankton. They're the base of marine food webs. And of course, they're incredibly important for providing food for entire marine ecosystems and also providing oxygen to ecosystems. And you can see the base of the food web. However, another big part of my study is going to be on harmful algal blooms. So that is the few species of phytoplankton that can be harmful either to marine life or even to human health. And so, for example, one of the species that we're very concerned with and always are monitoring for is Alexandrium. This is a dinoflagellate that makes the biotoxin known as saxitoxin. I'm not going to try to scare anybody, but saxitoxin is 1,000 times more potent than cyanide, so it's a serious human health threat. And it's been a serious issue on Long Island during the past decade. I'm showing here some, but even not all of, the PSP, paralytic shellfish poisoning related closures of shellfish beds on Long Island since 2006. Again, that compound saxitoxin concentrates in shellfish because they're filter feeders, and when it concentrates to very high levels, the DEC has to close down shellfish beds because it gets above the US FDA level for this particular toxin. You can see I've called out about a half a dozen sites here, but I need to update this based on additional new spots that were closed, particularly on the east end just last year. And you can see here we've been mapping this for nearly a decade, and the organism is everywhere. And an area in red would be above 1,000 cells per liter, which is an area that could be problematic for shellfish. And this organism also has provided some surprises in the last decade. So you may recall in 2015 there was an unprecedented die-off of hundreds of diamondback terrapin turtles in the Pathogenic estuary. At the time, it was a mystery as to what happened. Someone suggested, oh, it might be the red tide going on. And I dismissed it, actually, being perfectly honest with you, out of hand. Because I said, well, that's silly, because turtles don't eat shellfish. Until I discovered that diamondback terrapins do eat shellfish, in fact, and they only weigh about a pound. And therefore, it didn't take much for them to get a toxic dose. And so we published a paper just last year showing that it actually was, that the shellfish during the blooms that were occurring in Flanders Bay at the time were almost an order of magnitude higher than that FDA limit, and certainly enough to provide a toxic dose to the diamondback terrapin turtles. We actually did DNA testing of their digestive tracts and found that they were eating rib mussels, which doesn't quite close the loop, but it's probably as close as we're going to get in hindcasting what happened to these turtles. Another harmful algal bloom we keep track of is known as Cochlidinium polycricoides, or just Cochlidinium, or even easier, rust tides. This, thankfully, is not a human health threat. However, this is what we call an ichthyotoxic algae. It can cause fish kills. It also can be lethal to bivalves. And so there's data collected here by the East Hampton Town Shellfish Hatchery. This was in 2012, where they had a nice set of scallops that they were tracking, and suddenly with the onset of a rust tide, those scallop populations crashed thereafter. And this is a pattern. I just pulled out this data set from 3 Mile Harbor, but this has been seen in other locations as well. When you get a very large bloom of rust tide, you can lose a lot of scallops all at once. And then the final marine toxic algae we're looking at is Dinophysis. It makes this compound here known as oxidaic acid. It's not quite as, it's not lethal in the way that saxitoxin can be, but it's still a human health threat. And it's shown up in shellfish beds that are both opened and closed, and it's not tightly regulated currently by the DEC. But the organism is widespread, so it's worthwhile, therefore, knowing where this algae is growing and where the toxins may be showing up. On the freshwater front, we're closely looking at toxic cyanobacteria or blue-green algae. We have multiple types of blue-green algae that can make multiple classes of toxins that are a human health threat. And these are now very closely regulated by the DEC and the US EPA. So when I began this project 5 years ago, the DEC didn't really have a statewide program. The EPA did not have a federal standard. That's all changed. And so there are now federal standards for drinking water and for recreational water, and the DEC is very closely tracking every water body in every county of New York State for blue-green algae because it's been now recognized as a serious human health threat and an animal threat as well. And on the animal front, the CDC recently published a paper showing that there's been hundreds of cases of dog poisonings over the last century or so. And I always say if you ever want proof of this, wait till July or August, go to Google News and put in dog death and blue-green algae, and you'll see what I mean. It happens every year. And surprisingly, even though New York is a state of many lakes, the Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes, and all of upstate, people recreating in fresh water bodies, of the 62 counties in New York State, no county has more toxic blue-green algae blooms than Suffolk County. As you can see, this is the data from 2016 with 24 sites. Our closest rival was Westchester County at half of that. So these are widespread here on Long Island, probably partly related to being the furthest south where the warmest, in addition to nutrient loading, high temperatures and warm weather is more associated with these events.
Chris,
Yeah.
I don't see Nassau on there.
That's because there's actually no event in Nassau County, almost never. And so there does seem to be, I won't get into the details on it, but recognize that 70% of Nassau County are connected to sewage treatment plants. And so you don't have wastewater nutrients going from land to sea there, or directly so. and I think that's probably partly related. But it's not for a lack of looking. I will tell you, my lab has been designated by the DEC as the downstate testing facility for Long Island and New York State for blue-green algae, and so if there's a bloom, the DEC sends us the samples, we do the testing, and so I would, firstly, this is from the state's database, but I can tell you that we don't get even questionable calls out of Nassau County, so it really is a Suffolk County phenomenon. And then the last thing that we're looking carefully at, or one of the last things, are pathogenic bacteria. So these are bacteria that can cause human health problems. As you're probably aware, the DEC looks at fecal coliform bacteria to make decisions with regards to whether a water body is safe for shellfishing year-round, safe for shellfishing, for example, here in the blue, we're looking at Accabonac Harbor, of course, just seasonally, or some areas that are closed permanently. And that's because they may have these fecal coliform are actually what we call indicator bacteria. If they're present at high levels, that means there's other bacteria that could cause gastrointestinal illness that may also be in the water. And so that's the standard that DEC looks at for deciding if a shellfish bed should be opened or closed. Okay, so those are the major things we're looking at for the study. So the coliform bacteria, the different types of harmful algae, including toxic cyanobacteria, and also general water quality. And I'll get into things like dissolved oxygen as well. We have sites throughout East Hampton Town trustee waters, both in marine water bodies and fresh water bodies. In the larger systems, we have multiple sampling points. And we generally begin our sampling around now, and we carry it out through into the fall. So I think that's basically what I said. Most of the analyses are done in the Stony Brook Southampton laboratory. And whenever possible, whatever data we get, we compare to either state or federal standards. So things like the EPA and the DEC, when that's not available, comparing it to standards set up by the global scientific literature. Okay, so to get on to some of the things we found, I'm mainly going to just highlight 2017 results, but we have several years of data, so in some cases I'll be showing some averages and some long-term trends. So I'm going to start very simply with salinity. These are all the marine sites that we looked at, and it's not very exciting, but all the salinities are fairly high. You can see a range essentially from 27.5 to almost 30. Now, the coastal ocean is about 31. So what this tells us is, like I said in my intro, these water bodies are being well flushed with ocean-like water that keeps that salinity high, and that's a very good sign. I'll be highlighting through the talk Site 7 in Accabonac Harbor. I'll just go back to the map there at Rick Drew's request. That's the site near the culvert. In fact, it's just opposite or very near that culvert, so we can compare that site to the other sites to see how water quality is specifically at that site to the rest of Accabonac Harbor and other locations. And so...
Chris, have you compared that back your previous years when you started this to get some kind of baseline?
Well, we can do that. I'm not going to have that for this presentation. For this presentation, I'm primarily going to highlight last year, but certainly we can make that comparison. But I will point out for 2017 that I mentioned salinity shows good flushing, and you'll note the salinity at that site is higher than all the other sites. So showing that the culvert's doing its job and is bringing in higher salinity water and flushing out that region of Accabonac Harbor. With regards to chlorophyll, I have here 4 different numbers. 2017 is the blue. I'll also, for reference, showing 2016 and a running 4-year average. And I also have here up a limit that is set by both the US EPA and by NOAA. Above 20 micrograms per liter, they would call a eutrophic water body in marine systems. And so you can see, on average, all these sites are looking quite good, being well below that level, and certainly not at a level, if you had too little chlorophyll, you might be concerned also for filter feeding bivalves, but certainly we're above that threshold. So we're in a good spot on chlorophyll. And on dissolved oxygen, there are a couple of standards of DEC sets at 3 and 5 milligrams per liter. They never want to see less than 3, and ideally not less than 5. And on average, you can see all the sites are quite good. There's one site that on minimum within 3 Mile Harbor was between those 2 levels. But as a foreshadow, I'll tell you, these are static daytime single point measurements. We do some continuous monitoring for some sites, and I'm going to show that data later, actually, for this particular site in 3 Mile Harbor. But on average, during the day, the dissolved oxygen levels are very good. And the site in Aquabonic Harbor is right there with all the other sites, so no significant differences, maybe even a little higher than the equivalent site on the other side. With regards to indicator bacteria, so looking at fecal coliform bacteria, on average, you would never want to see anything above 14, what they call colony-forming units per 100 milliliters of seawater. And we don't see that anywhere except for the same site, the back of 3 Mile Harbor, which on average is above that standard. And I should point out, you'll see momentarily, these are areas that are both open and partially closed to shellfishing. So I'll give a little bit more interpretation in the future slides. Note that the levels of fecal coliform bacteria are 3-fold lower by the culvert compared to the other sites. With regards to the absolute maximum, that's another way to look at these coliform bacteria, the way DEC looks at it. And again, below the threshold for all the sites except for the head of 3 Mile Harbor. And again, the lowest within Aquabonic Harbor being by the culvert, suggesting that flushing is helping to keep that area clean. And just with regards to dynamics, there was actually one date that blew the whole season for 3 Mile Harbor that was very, very far above after a rainfall event that led to that very high level.
Chris, I have a question.
Yeah.
These readings are taken on outgoing tide, is that right?
No, we don't. We purposely take a mix of tides. So we purposely sample, actually irrespective of tides, but we sample enough that we're always going to get a high tide, a low tide, incoming, outgoing, because we want to capture all of that. And so we're purposely trying to make sure that through the year we get every tidal stage so that we're not biasing it towards one or the other.
Chris, what was the date on 3 Mile Harbor?
That was, it looks like, I'm going to
July 21st.
guesstimate it July 21st, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not captured here, but in general, when you see, the high levels typically occur during the warmer months. So that's not surprising.
Is this no good?
And then, so this just shows in the yellow, it's the 4-year trend, and so, last year was better than other years. The last 2 years were actually, if you see, in many locations, with the yellow popping out here, just shows you that years prior to that were actually higher than what we saw this past year. So, for example, we've had problems in some parts of Aquabonic Harbor, but certainly not last year. And certainly not at the site by the culvert. Okay, so this slide here takes all of our different sites, and it shows the current status for all the sites by the New York State DEC, and then shows the results that we got, and then compares the two. And so, and this is looking from 2014 to 2017, so sort of a long-term data set. And so in general, the data shows that the DEC has it right for most locations. We do find 3 locations where the areas are deemed seasonal, and it's possible with more testing that they might be potentially opened. Now, very important I give this caveat. I am not the DEC, and my sampling does not meet their rigors of sampling. And so this does not mean these locations should be open to shellfishing, but it does mean that if the DEC had the resources or the town had the resources to do more sampling, this would point out 3 locations where with more sampling, it could lead to them potentially being open in the future. And that's happened before. So for example, when I first did my sampling in 2013, all of Northwest Creek was permanently closed to shellfishing. There was no shellfishing allowed in Northwest Creek. Our first year of data suggested that could potentially be eased. And I don't think it had anything to do with my data, and I'm not saying that at all, but I will say that by the next year, the northern half of Northwest Creek was open seasonally to shellfishing. So this is permanent. Again, this is seasonal closure. And then I'll just say that our sampling of that same location through time suggests that could be an area that could be permanently open, potentially. Again, That's not for me to say, but if you wanted to focus on one location, this could be a good one.
Would
Yeah.
it be, Chris, would it be beneficial to open that cut a little more to allow for aggressive flushing or more?
Potentially. You know, the one thing I'll just very quickly say is with anytime you alter, you know, dredging is good. It allows for more flow in general, but there sometimes can be the law of unintended consequences, and so you never know. You don't want to always assume that making an adjustment here flushes out the whole thing. It could do that. It could also just flush out part of it and make another part more stagnant. I'm reminded, for example, of the new inlet in Great South Bay, which I've been studying since it formed after Superstorm Sandy. In general, it's totally transformed eastern Great South Bay. However, there is an area in central and western Great South Bay that's become more stagnant and has become more prone to brown tides. So just as a quick example of, you know, you always want to make sure, well, get as much information as you can before making changes. That's all. Okay, and then just a couple of other sites on 3 Mile Harbor. I showed you how high levels were in the head of the harbor. So again, this designations here look right on the money, as do almost all of them. The northern part of 3 Mile Harbor as well. We do find that this area of Hands Creek that is closed seems to be pretty clean. And that's an area, again, that could be a focal point in the future.
Is that in the creek?
It's actually just outside, this small area just outside of the creek. And
It's a partial mooring area, too.
Okay, yes, and that's probably why. And I will just say that these sites were chosen by the trustees when I first started my sampling. It was partly because, you know, one of the objectives was, hey, how should these places be open or closed, or what does the actual data look like? So that's what we're doing here. And then in Hog Creek, again, the seasonal closure and opening in this area looks good. This area here, the southern part, looks pretty clean. And that according to the data that we've collected, looks like it meets the thresholds, and it could be a focal area in the future. Okay, moving on to some of the harmful algal blooms. And we'll start with Alexandrium. So ominous looking there with the poison symbol. But in good news, actually, last year was a very light year for Alexandrium in East Hampton. We had one sample that's 70 cells per liter on average at that same spot in the head of the harbor, about 12 cells per liter through the sampling season, and no detects at the other locations. So this is really good news. You know, when you get into the hundreds, you worry, and so we never even got close to that. So great news on the front of Alexandrium. But just shows you that if the 5-year running average is 240, that this was anomalously low, so less than average year. And in general, that's the location that's generally problematic, the head of the harbor. But it's a good thing that we do sample long term. This is just calling out our first 3 years of sampling within the head of the harbor, and our first year, things looked very mild. And then in 2013, we got to very high levels. The DEC was well, I was going to use the word panicked, but there was definitely some emergency action taken to look at the shellfish within the head of the harbor because of these very high levels. The shellfish thankfully didn't come up above the FDA threshold, and you can see then the next year it was somewhat mild. So a lot of this has to do with seasonal temperature patterns with regards to whether you're going to get a very bad year or not. On the Dinophysis front, things were quite mild. So, in fact, there was no Dinophysis whatsoever. What you're looking at in the orange are the 2016 detects, no detections in 2017, and again, the yellow shows you the 5-year running average, so certainly last year was below average, but in very good news. The news was not quite as good for Coccidium. Again, this is the rust tide that we worry about because of its effects on marine life, not on human health. We had some very high detects in 3 Mile Harbor, and so this is showing the maximum detection and the average for the season. Also some high levels in parts of Accabonac Harbor, and also some detects in Hog Creek. And in head of the harbor, it was really just 2 sampling dates that drove that whole pattern. But the one thing I will say, and maybe if I go back really If you look at this pattern here, this is what rust tide looks like. So some algal blooms, like a brown tide, the water is all the same color. And so what you can see here is this is a very heterogeneous makeup, ephemeral, patchy, and so, and this is a snapshot, and of course this is all moving in space and time. And it's moving in 3 dimensions as well, so they vertically migrate. So it's not uncommon, it's very difficult to pin down a precise number. So when I show something like this, and back down to 0 and a very low level here, this could simply be these patches moving in and out. Amazingly, they seem to actually be able to move independent of tides and currents. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's partly because of the way they can vertically migrate. But these are very high levels. We've shown that 300 cells per milliliter can lead to the death of fish, small fish, and the repeat extended exposure at a level of say 1,000 can be lethal to shellfish. So these are high levels and concerning for the head of the harbor region of 3 Mile Harbor, and just one high level for Accabonac Harbor. And here are the 3-year running averages. Again, the levels this year were not as bad as previous years. So you can see the average in 2016 was at 7,000. So that's off the charts. And again, at the same location, head of the harbor and 3 Mile Harbor. Whereas the other locations were somewhat more typical of an average year. So I think I said head of the harbor. I don't know how many, who's got the clicker going? I don't know. I've said it a bunch of times, so I do want to take a moment to focus in on that. I've done that before, but I think it bears repeating. This is obviously an area that's had problems through the years. In addition, just looking at chlorophyll, I showed that 20 microgram per liter threshold. It's the only site that ever exceeded that in 2017. So on 2 dates, it got above the 20 microgram per liter threshold. And then this is one of the sites we focus in on continuous oxygen monitoring, because I mentioned before, hey, oxygen looks great when you sample during the day. But one thing we've learned in the last decade or so is that oxygen levels can fluctuate a lot between day and night, because you have photosynthesis during the day that's pumping oxygen into the system, and then that ceases at night and the oxygen levels go down. So we've implemented continuous monitoring for oxygen within the head of the harbor. And that's what this looks like. It's a pretty squiggly record, but it goes from May through to the end of August. And what I've put in here is the New York State DEC never go lower than threshold of 3 milligrams per liter. And again, it looks squiggly, and so you might look at that and say, oh, bad data, but that's that day-night cycle. And in any given day and night, it's going from super oxygenated, and then in many times, so as soon as we got into summer, July and August, almost daily excursions below that level. And there's also some physics working in here, because warm water holds less oxygen. In the winter, saturated oxygen levels are going to be 12 milligrams per liter. In the summer, with no biology whatsoever, it gets down to saturating is about 6 milligrams per liter. So it doesn't take a lot for that oxygen level to get drawn down. So you can clearly see, in the summer, during these warm temperature periods, this area is hitting hypoxic levels of oxygen almost nightly. And I'll just point out also, this is some data from Suffolk County that bears looking into. There's at one point in time, I said something like, when it comes to eutrophication and algal blooms and low oxygen, there's 2 components. There's flushing of the water body and heavy nitrogen loads, right? And when you have those 2 things come together, there's going to be problems. And that's exactly what's going on here. So you've got the spit that reduces the amount of flushing to the head of the harbor, and these are the levels of total nitrogen in the groundwater around 3 Mile Harbor. And what it shows is that the super high levels are just a ring around the head of the harbor. So there are the 2 things you don't want coming together. And so all the things that we're showing with all the algal blooms are taking off there, the oxygen levels are problematic there, perfectly lines up with that. It also happens to be taking data from a study by Stephen Lloyd from the Nature Conservancy, where he looked at nitrogen loading to different water bodies across the whole Peconics. But that 3 Mile Harbor had a higher rate of nitrogen loading than any of the other water bodies that we're looking at here in East Hampton. And we've done correlations looking at the relationship between the nitrogen loading rates and the amount of chlorophyll in a water body, or the amount of nitrogen coming from wastewater and the amount of chlorophyll, and these things will line up very well. And I should have just pointed out before, 3 Mile Harbor is also the site with the most nitrogen coming from wastewater. So, we don't need to guess, hey, where's that nitrogen coming from? We've done the math, and it's 2/3 coming from wastewater, which means homes on septic tanks and cesspools in that area, which accounts for that, that ring right there. Okay, but the hopeful sign, I showed this last year, but it's worth looking at again, is that the groundwater travel times around 3 Mile Harbor, compared to some other parts of Long Island, are pretty quick. And so what's shown here is that you end up getting to almost 80% of the water body, the groundwater travel time, is 25 years or less. 50%, or more than 50%, 60% is 10 years or less. And so what that means is, and particularly around the head of the harbor here, rapid action would lead to rapid results. And so stated another way, there are some people who, for example, live on Great South Bay who say, it took us decades to get into this problem, it's going to take us decades to get out. That's not the case here. And actually for a lot of East Hampton, particularly for 3 Mile Harbor, particularly the head of the harbor, really that ring of nitrogen, problematic nitrogen levels are within the 10-year travel time, most of it, almost all of it in fact. And so what that means is that addressing nitrogen loading from wastewater could have a rapid effect on that region. And just as we all know this, and this isn't under the purview of the trustees, but I'll just emphasize that the renewal of the community preservation funds puts 20% of those funds not into land acquisition, but into improving nitrogen loading. The county recently, or a year ago, approved the use of innovative and alternative septic systems that remove more nitrogen compared to a standard system. They have a series of systems that are approved to be installed. They've shown to reduce nitrogen levels to usually below 19 milligrams per liter. And I'll just emphasize that at Stony University, I had something known as the New York State Center for Clean Water Technology, where we're also piloting alternative systems. And just quickly show that we have some systems that we call nitrogen-reducing biofilters that have a few different iterations, but in general are drain fields on top of layers of sand and sand mixed with wood chips. And I'll just very quickly, a few different designs, but I'll just very quickly show that in testing that we've done at a test facility in Massachusetts. This is the level of nitrogen coming in. This is the level of nitrogen going out. We've got 3 different iterations of these systems, and they're all reducing nitrogen levels to below 10 milligrams per liter on average. So for perspective, here's 10, here's 20. I believe this one on average is about 7 milligrams per liter. Another system that's at a similar level, and a third system that is consistently less than 5 milligrams per liter on average over more than a year and a half, 3 milligrams per liter. So places like 3 Mile Harbor have problems with regards to all sorts of eutrophication that's driven by wastewater, but we're now in a position to address that issue, and based on the groundwater travel times, we should be able to get our way out of this in a short period of time. And I should say we've installed our first systems of those nitrogen-reducing biofilters here on Long Island just last month, and we'll be installing 9 more in the rest of this calendar year. We're hoping they'll be provisionally approved by the county a year thereafter. Okay, moving to freshwater, I want to talk about that last type of algal bloom, specifically blue-green algae, also known as toxic cyanobacteria. And so in 2007, on average, here's the New York State DEC standard. They don't want to see more than 20 micrograms per liter. And you can see on average, all the water bodies we looked at, Fresh Pond, multiple locations in Georgia Pond and Hook Pond, were below that level. We had a short period of time in Georgia Pond, I think actually it was literally 1 week, that was above that level. And you can see where that was in June, a single location. But of the East Hampton Town trustee water bodies that I'm sampling on behalf of the trustees, generally blue-green algae in 2017 were at low levels. For perspective, however, what I'll point out is in the past we've had some very high levels. For example, here's Georgia Pond and Hook Pond, all locations exceeding the average levels, far exceeding the threshold in 2015. And we're higher again in 2016, but 2017 was a very good year. And these fresh water bodies, again, oxygen levels look pretty good in general. I'll get to the continuous monitoring momentarily. The standard for chlorophyll in freshwater bodies is more stringent than marine water bodies. They want to see no higher than 8 micrograms per liter. So in Georgia Pond, the levels were consistently above that. And so that's another area that's got short groundwater travel times and may also, and has most of the nitrogen coming from wastewater, and therefore is another area that could be targeted for improvement of wastewater to address, even if it's not blue-green algae blooms, high levels of algae in general. One important thing to point out that we saw a strong trend in 2017 that we saw a little bit in the past, but really jumped out in 2017, has to do with the opening of the cut. And so here is the continuous monitoring of oxygen in Georgia Pond in 2017. And so the first thing I'm going to point out is here's that 3 milligram per liter threshold, and the levels you can see through the summer are fabulous. And that contrasts, as I'll point out here, in prior years when we did have problems with blue-green algae, you can see plenty of excursions below the hypoxic threshold. However, we thought we saw this in the past, but it really jumped out in this last fall. When the cut was open last October, and I'll zoom in here to show precisely what happened. In the blue is the salinity of Georgia Pond. So before you open the cut, it was nearly a fresh water body. Once the cut is open, the salinity rises very quickly. What we thought we saw in the past and was very distinct last year is the fact that as soon as the cut was open, the oxygen levels declined to nearly zero and stayed that way for nearly 2 days. And consistent with that, Priscilla Whittle is here and took some very nice photos and informed me of some fish kills that happened with the opening of the cut. And so here's a close-up and a more widespread view. Now again, maybe having the salinity data will help put this in perspective. Here's the salinity of Georgia Pond, May through October, super low, 5 parts per thousand. At that end, and therefore very, very full. And so I think part of what may have well been going on is higher than usual water levels, and anybody who lived in the water body can tell you that certainly was the case. And then with the letting out of the cut, the exposure of these large mudflats. And so this could have been a combination of many things. The mudflats being exposed and leading to a lot of oxygen consumption in a shallower water body, fish being trapped on the mudflats, decaying fish contributing to the oxygen. But regardless of the precise cause, and we can look into it further, this certainly was a real occurrence, that drop of the oxygen with the opening of the cut. And certainly you can see here, there's the jump in the salinity with the opening and cut of the well. So the salinity of Georgia Pond is very strongly coupled to whether the cut's open or closed. And so it had been open from, I guess, March 15th, and for 3 weeks. And now it's going to be closed through the summer. So we're probably going to see a pattern somewhat reminiscent of last year with regards to the salinity, in that the salinity will now, as you see here, with the cut closed, will now start dropping. And I believe this weekend, we put in the buoy for continuous monitoring of that system, so we'll have a keen sense of what's going on. And of course, I can't remember the URL, but we can point you to that in the future. You can look for yourselves. Yes, John?
Do you think this same phenomenon would occur in the spring, after the spring opening?
There is, let's just see, that's a good question. If we go back here, the answer looks like not really. Because in 2015, if you can see this, there actually was an opening. The cut reopened in June and then closed again, late May and closed again in early June. That didn't happen. Now, the water levels were much lower then also. So I think it's a combination of many things. Okay, getting close to the end here. We also did harvesting of macroalgae in Georgia Pond last year, so I want to give you a quick update on that. The second year of doing that. There were less macroalgae in 2017, so the total harvest of 32,700 pounds was less than what we had the prior year, and therefore the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that came out of the pond with that was less, about 1% of the annual load. But what we're really interested in what happens in the summer, but still a small percentage of the total, even summer nitrogen and phosphorus load, somewhere between 6 and 12%. Which one would think wouldn't have a large consequence. However, just will point out, 2015 is a year when we had massive blue-green algae blooms that broke out starting in the end of July and persisted into October. Put a couple of thresholds in here at 10 and 20 micrograms per liter. With the harvester the last 2 years, the levels, same exact scale here, you can see the levels significantly lower, and each year I think 1 week of high levels of blue-green algae. So and we're going to do it again this year, but so far it looks like it's beneficial as far as discouraging blue-green algae. I'm going to talk more about that as I wrap. With regards to dissolved oxygen, also looked much better the last 2 years. Again, I showed this before. Constant excursions below the hypoxia threshold without the harvester. I should say I'm showing 2015, but it's indicative also of 2014. The 2 years were very, very similar with regards to blue-green algae and low oxygen. But the oxygen levels, save for that dip when the cut was open, were high throughout the in-season period. So again, looks like, good water quality when the harvester was present. And so a working hypothesis so far is that when we have heavy levels of nitrogen loading, they lead to macroalgae blooms. I did a poor job of giving the background. In 14 and 15, we saw massive outbreaks of macroalgae blooms, such as these, occurring in late spring and early summer. And then they would decay, and the hypothesis is that that decay essentially just is pulsing nutrients, a massive amount, right into the water column, which then the blue-green algae would take advantage of to form a bloom. And if you look into the literature, blue-green algae like what we call recycled and regenerated nutrients. So not only are they getting a massive pulse all at once, but they're getting the types of nutrients that they would like. Whereas with the harvester, there were some macroalgae each year, albeit them less than 2014 and 15, but they were being pulled out. And so those nutrients, those recycled nutrients, are not being pumped back into the system. And I'll just point out that right now the macroalgae are going to the town landfill, but we've been doing work on doing both what we call elemental analysis of the macroalgae. So how much nitrogen and phosphorus we're taking out, are there the blue-green algae toxins in there? And the answer is no. High levels of trace metals, and appears not. And we're also looking into the ability of transforming this big ugly mat into fertilizer that then can be used for people instead of having to buy commercial fertilizer. And I won't get into the details on that, but there's some promise in that. Okay, very last thing. You've seen that there's been high levels of coliform bacteria in Georgia Pond. In the past, it's made the news. It even made international news in 2016. If you didn't know that, what was it? The Examiner, the UK Examiner. All sorts of outlandish accusations about where this was coming from. But in this past year, with support from the Friends of Georgia Pond that I didn't mention before, they also supported the harvester activity. We took on a new scientific study that I think you should be aware of, something called microbial source tracking, which very simply uses DNA-based technology to trace the types of bacteria that are in a water body. And so, remember, I told you already, some water bodies are closed to shellfishing because there's high levels of pathogenic bacteria. But when you measure fecal coliform bacteria, that doesn't tell you where those bacteria are coming from, just tell you there's high levels. And if you want to do something to correct that problem, you need to know where the bacteria are coming from. Are they coming from deer, or geese, or people, or pets? And as you can imagine, the managerial solution for cleaning up a water body will be radically different if the bacteria are coming from humans versus coming from deer or birds, etc. So we use this technology to do a study of some of the creeks of Georgia Pond last year. And I'll say this is a first ever study here in Long Island using a technology called digital PCR. We put a ton of effort into doing this, got a new instrument, did a lot of what we call quality assurance, quality control on this analysis, did a lot of positive controls, negative controls, and we'll be continuing it this year, but maybe before I explain all that, I'll just show some of the data. So this is showing time series for Talmadge Creek, which I should maybe point out is the northwest extent of Georgica Ponds. We did most of our sampling for Talmadge Creek and also for Georgica Cove. And the reason being, those are two areas that are known to have very high levels of pathogenic bacteria. So a very intensive time series for these locations and just spot sampling of these creeks is sort of a control and for comparison. And what the study found is that, first thing I'll point out, in red is the human-based bacteria. Now, the red comes up in every single sample, even if you can't see it. So there definitely is human-based bacteria getting into Georgica Pond and these creeks. However, it's not the strongest signal. We're also seeing birds, and we're seeing ruminant deer, but the strongest signal here is the canine signal. Now, I need to give some important caveats for this digital PCR and this whole approach, and that is it's highly specific for this. The primer sets we use to detect the dog bacteria are highly specific, and therefore, if there is dog-based fecal matter in there, you'll get a positive hit no matter what. However, there is some cross-reactivity, and that is to say that when you detect dog-based bacteria, what you're detecting is what is known as the microbiome, what's growing in the guts of the different organisms. And so you definitely, with these primers, get the dog bacteria, but there is some cross-reactivity for some other animals. So we believe this is a tracer for things beyond just dogs, probably rodents, certainly cats, because we think they all may share a similar microbiome. And in the future, next year, we'll be expanding the number of animals that we'll be looking at. There's a lot of good tracers for livestock. There's not a lot of good tracers for wild animals, for reasons you might be able to figure out on your own. When you break it down into percentages, which is shown here, again, just shows what I showed you before. For most locations, the strong signal with the dog primers, again, was believing there's some cross-reactivity. Some important other data points that come up. Jones Creek being this is the one creek that doesn't have any connectivity to the road, so it's a very natural location. And in that location, we see a signal primarily from birds and from deer. And the other thing that I'm not going to have time to get into too much details, but when we see spikes and the levels of, and maybe that's shown better in the last one, when we see spikes in the levels of the dog signal, all of these are coincidence with pulses of rain. And if you don't know already, both Georgica Cove and Talmadge Creek are literally plumbed to the roadways. And so that is in a heavy rainfall event. It rains, and the rain from all along Montauk Highway goes in through a drainage basin into Talmadge Creek. And we discovered late last year, earlier this year, that there's the same system set up for Georgica Cove, and this drainage system that goes very far north. Mm-hmm. How far north, Sarah? Do you know?
Long way.
7 miles of drainage. So, the idea is it's not just that there's the animal waste right there, but it's going very far afield and making its way through. And so this is good news, because there's efforts already underway via the town where this road runoff, I think, can be addressed and these issues can be mitigated. And I just point out that there may be interest in applying this to other water bodies. We did this for Georgica Cove. We're going to try to do this for Sag Harbor. There may be other East Hampton town water bodies where if an area is closed to shellfishing, we're not sure why, this could lend some insight to that. And with that, I'm done. And so, in general, my conclusions are that most of the water bodies have excellent water quality. Of course, I focused on the areas that were problematic. But let's be real. almost all the marine sites had excellent water quality. Really, the 3 Mile Harbor ahead of the harbor stands out, but outside of that, consistent with my original premise, the water quality in East Hampton Town trustee waters and marine systems is very good. So, the focus on 3 Mile Harbor, which is great. We now know here's an area we should be focusing on. With regards to some of the sites for fecal coliform bacteria, there are areas that, again, we can now focus on because maybe with some more sampling of the DEC, there could be areas that could be open to shellfishing. And with the microbial source tracking, there could be areas that we get a better sense of where the bacteria are coming from. Again, 3 Mile Harbor had problems with low oxygen, harmful algal blooms, high nitrogen loading, and certainly is an area that needs focus going forward. And again, I know the trustees aren't in charge of the community preservation funds, but for the committee that is, I would say that we need to see projects there really addressing that location. If the interest is in addressing water quality improvement, marine water bodies, as far as my data set goes, that would be a number one. And then we saw better water quality in Georgia Pond the last 2 years. Happened to be years we're harvesting macroalgae, so we're going to continue that to see what happens. So with that, I am grateful for the support from the East Hampton Town trustees. I think this is a really important data set. East Hampton and the trustees are learning a lot. I'm learning a lot also from it, and it's informing other studies as well. I'm thankful to the Friends of Georgia Pond for funding the more extensive studies there. Again, I think the information we're gathering there is having a lot of cross-application to other water bodies in East Hampton and elsewhere. And certainly, I am indebted to people like my students, and I'll call out Mark Lusty, James Logasai, Christopher Wozni, Craig Shanone, and Ryan Wallace for doing all sorts of in-depth work in the field in the lab. So thanks for your attention, and if there are questions, I'd be happy to address them. I apologize for taking too long.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lowell.
You're welcome.
Regarding Fresh Pond,
Yes.
it was brought to our attention via some surf rider testing that there were some issues, I think it was on the south side of Fresh Pond, near the modest outflow that's there. Do you have anything today that you might be able to share above and beyond what you presented on Fresh Pond, or is that something we can focus on a little more looking ahead?
We had done some work there originally, and we certainly can do more work there. I think in the first years we had done work there, we had, I think, I don't want to misspeak, but I believe originally one of our access points ended up being problematic. If there's good public access points, then we certainly can re-up that sampling. I'm somehow remembering, maybe it's not this water body, but I remember a student saying, well, it was great in the spring, and now when I go in there in the summer, it's full of ticks, and so, and overgrown and such.
It's
so.
a wooded area, so it could be a ticky environment.
Yeah, so I do think that, yeah, anyway.
But the beach areas are always open.
Okay.
And the one by the restroom is generally a fairly wide path there.
I didn't have the data here, but I do remember last summer we did do some sampling, emergency sampling at request, and I had reported back on, I think, low levels of blue-green algae and modest levels of indicator bacteria. But certainly, if there's the interest, so as is every year, I will now, based on sort of your feedback, you have time to think about it, put together the sampling scheme for this year. So certainly, if that's important for the trustees, we can put that in.
Yeah, we may have a project going there to improve the water exchange.
Okay, yeah.
Off the top of your head, what areas in trustee waters might you say would benefit from microbial source tracking? Most benefit, I'd say.
Best to not be off the top of my head. But I think we can talk about, I think certainly areas that are closed and that, that the trustees want to see opened. The whole idea behind it would be, here's an area we think if we'd like to be able to improve for either bathing and or for shellfishing. And so, I would, when you asked that question, the first thing that came to mind was just sitting down and once again, I just recently was looking at, but look at all the DEC shellfishing maps and say, hey, this is an area that we think could be, we'd like to see open. Because the information that would come back from it should then inform a management plan that could lead to it addressing the runoff. And very important, I just need to emphasize one further thing on this microbial source tracking. The sources of these bacteria are different than the sources of nitrogen to water bodies. And that's an important thing to recognize. So, in the last decade, I think we've all become aware, oh wow, there's a lot of nitrogen coming from wastewater and septic tanks. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the bacteria are coming from, and rather it could be surface runoff. And that's therefore why you want to get this water body specific information, and then a management plan could come from that. So I could independently look and give you feedback, but I would encourage all of you to look as well at the shellfishing maps and say, hey, why don't we let's get more information on this particular water body.
And regardless of the source of the bacteria, it's all going to contribute to fecal coliform.
Correct.
So really the value of it is to say, let's say we could identify a source and then tie that to road runoff and then address the road runoff.
Correct. And it may well be, we did studies of creeks, water can be flowing there, but in other areas, septic tanks may well come up. There's sort of, if a septic tank is known to be a certain distance from a water body, you would expect there to be that influence. And so, again, the management scheme there would be different.
This was like the project they tried years ago down by Northwest Creek. Well, Hands Creek would probably, be a good spot.
Do you make recommendations for like remediation purposes?
Well, I do to some extent. For example, like 3 Mile Harbor, the head of 3 Mile Harbor. I'm not telling people what to do, but I guess I'm saying if there's an effort to be made, to me that stands out as an area that I think deserves some attention.
But I don't hear you actually coming out, and I'm not being critical,
No, sure.
of saying, whatever the application is, dredging would be really helpful here.
Yeah, well, what I will say is that I did say, and I'll emphasize, certainly addressing the septic tanks and cesspools in that area, I think, to me, is just a very obvious outcome, managerial outcome from my studies. So, again, dredging, a little less, can be more uncertainty there, but certainly that would, addressing the wastewater and the watershed of the head of 3 Mile Harbor is
I think the groundwater's got to get looked at really good, yeah.
Thanks.
Yes.
Francesca Rhiannon, President of the Aquaponic Protection Committee. And one question I have, it seems most of it is coming from the septic systems, but I wonder if you could say how much, if any, nitrogen loading is coming from fertilizers that are being used, and can you tell the difference in your testing?
And so the answer is you can tell, and that number is available. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go back through my slides, but the Nature Conservancy study of nitrogen loading to the Pathogenic estuary has that number for Aquaponic Harbor. And that number will be, and the same study is being replicated currently by Suffolk County. And there's a watershed study, so you would be able to get that value, that number reaffirmed, so to speak. Yeah. And so if you, I have that study, you could email me and I can send it to you. Yeah. Andy.
You mentioned there were no hits for Alexandrium, that there was Coplodinium. I don't think it was as consistent and prolonged as it has been in past years. What was it like in other parts of Long Island? And do you attribute it at all to last year's weather pattern?
So everything is very site specific, and so we actually, for Alexandrium, between the Pathogenic estuary and Shinnecock Bay, we actually had more closures than anywhere else before. And Coplodinium was sort of a short-lived period. So I would say that what we saw in the head of the harbor, 3 Mile Harbor, was indicative of the overall trend, so that consistent with what we saw sort of in Shinnecock and Pathogenic with regards to rust tide, but it was anomalously low compared to those locations for Alexandrium. Yes.
Scott, could you come up to the podium, please, so everyone can hear you at home? I'm sorry. Thank you.
I noticed in your map of Napeague that there were two testing areas, one by Lazy Point and one by the end of the road next to the walking dunes. I was noticing also you didn't have any testing area at the head of the harbor, where you had problems at 3 Mile Harbor and in Accabonac. You know, there's an easy road access by the art barge, which is next to the housing and 27. And I was thinking that if you tested there, I bet you would find levels that were more consistent with Accabonac. And I'm wondering maybe it might be a good idea to test there just because of it's really shallow there, the water gets really warm, there's less water flow. You might see that there may be, you know, maybe there might be some concerns about people harvesting shellfish there if you tested in that location. What do you think?
Certainly worth looking into. Again, the sites, all the sites that are being sampled are sort of at the behest of the trustees. And so you know, with the limited resources, or not unlimited resources to sample everywhere, but certainly I would agree with everything you said, that if there was a part of Napeague that would be most problematic, it sounds like that would be the location. So you know, if the trustees deem that to be a place that's worth looking into, I certainly, you know, for purposes of contrasting different locations, that would be probably the best spot to look at. It sounds like.
Just on that.
Yes.
Did that mess you up with looking at things year after year?
I don't think so. I think, you know, I already have what I call core monitoring sites. So even within each system, some locations are high focal points more so than other locations. And so, you know, I think we could certainly continue long-term monitoring at those core stations. And, you know, if we decided we wanted to go the route of adding some stations like that one, I think that would be a good idea. And maybe there's other ones where, you know, the culvert and there's a bit of interest. Maybe we want to reintroduce Fresh Pond, and maybe we would, other locations, we would do a little bit less sampling. I think that's okay, you know, so long as we, like I said, we could think about as sentinel stations for each water body that we would keep consistent. So, but happy to make adjustments as we all collectively think makes sense.
Thank you very much, Dr.
All right, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very informative.
I haven't seen one yet, but we'll talk to him. Oh, okay. All right, start with the public portion. Simon Kinsella. No.
He put a copy in, which is not a bad thing. But he had a zippy.
Oh, okay. Hey, Simon.
Thank you. Do you want to?
Oh, here, I got a bunch here.
There are 7.
Yeah. Sorry, man.
Thank you.
For the record, you get best dressed. Again.
It's difficult following Dr. Gobler.
Yeah.
His presentation, you know, I love science, I love the transparency, and everything he's doing is showing a lot of promise. Unfortunately, my topic is exactly the opposite. It's very little science and certainly not much transparency. What I wanted to do is just to update the trustees on my line of thinking and where I am with my research and looking into this proposition, Deepwater wind, and trying to understand the nature of it without being told much due to the lack of transparency. I won't read in detail the letter that I've written to you all. That you do that when you have more time. But I just want to go through quickly a couple of facts, and that is that firstly, the project has been costed out by the Office of the State Comptroller for New York at $1.625 billion. So it is not a cheap proposition. You will remember that I wrote estimated a financial, through some financial modelling from the market side or the consumer side, trying to delve into the project, and I estimated that it would be a little more than $1.5 billion. So it's 1.625, which isn't too far off. I don't want to speak to the fisheries and the environment because there are people that know more about that than I do. I just want to look at the consumer side and the rate paying and economics, which of course we're all involved with as well. One of the things that concerned me was the reduction in CO2 emissions, or their claim of reduction in CO2 emissions, which was one of the main reasons they wanted to go ahead with the wind farm. Unfortunately, when the wind farm becomes operable, it will only be producing a capacity of 34 megawatts. That is calculated by taking the nameplate capacity, which is 90 megawatts, and timesing it by a ratio of 38%, which gives you 34.2 megawatts. In the prior year, 2 years that I've been talking with Deepwater Wind, I was never told that. It was never in any presentations, and they were making comparisons between incorrect information.
Simon, you did see the average data for the Block Island.
I did. That was 39%.
Because it falls right in line with your
Exactly, yeah. And it falls in line with standards, European standards as well. It's very rare for an offshore wind farm in Europe to achieve above 55%. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with the wind farm per se due to those ratios. Those ratios are more a factor of the wind isn't blowing as much and things like that, or the distance of the transmission lines, or the loss of output over the transmission lines, etc. So it's not to say it is a bad company or whatever, it's just the reality of putting a wind farm in that location. That said, Deepwater Wind should have been more open with us and told us up front that this is a wind farm that will produce 34.2 megawatts, or that's what we expect. The problem is, of course, last year, we were told at the Wayne Scott Citizens Advisory Committee and the subcommittee, the environmental subcommittee, and other organisations, that the reason for the wind farm is that we are going to have a shortfall in peak demand for electricity. And I've circled there on page 2 the year 2023, where the wind farm will hit its first peak electricity demand. And that's usually in the summer when the wind is low and everybody wants to turn on their air conditioners. They've estimated, or PSEG have estimated, and Deepwater Wind have been publicising the fact that in 2023 there will be a shortfall of 75 megawatts, but their wind farm will only produce 32 megawatts. So the year in which the wind farm will become operational, it will only be producing 45% of the shortfall of electricity that Deepwater Wind are saying we need. The question, of course, is why are we spending $1.6 billion on a wind farm that doesn't produce the electricity we need, or only produces 45% of the electricity we need? The other thing that is becoming apparent, and again, this is actually from Deepwater Wind's own website. They made a proposal recently in December and in April, last December and this April, for 2 new wind farms, one for Connecticut and another one for Massachusetts. The one for Massachusetts is, it's a variable bid, so it can be between 200 and 400 megawatts. The one for Connecticut is a 200 megawatt bid. So combined, it's 400 to 600 megawatts. So it's substantially larger proposition than the 90 megawatt South Fork wind farm. On their website, Deepwater Wind say that they're going to interconnect all the wind farms, their wind farms, and potentially other wind farms from other operators in the area, and that their lease area will become, in their terms, a regional energy centre. That's the phraseology they use. The cable that they're installing for the interconnecting transmission system will be scalable up to 1,600 megawatts, which gives you an idea of the potential size of all these wind farms when they're connected to one another. Essentially, what's happening is there's going to be an offshore electrical grid. Now, I'm not going to speak to the implications for the fisheries about that, the fact that this whole proposition could end up, or looks as though, or they're planning it for it to be a lot larger than what we're currently looking at. So I think the fisheries need to look at that very, very closely to see what the implications. I mean, for example, if they do a test on a 138 kilovolt cable and say the EMF has no impact on the fish, and then they go put in a 400 kilovolt cable and try and use the same data, that science doesn't stand up. So there's a lot that is going to happen down the road that can influence what the science that they're trying to imply at the moment. The question that raises is, why are we building a 90 megawatt wind farm that won't produce the electricity we need for $1.6 billion when 6 months later there's going to be a 400 to 600 megawatt wind farm right next door, and they're all going to be connected to one another. So if you connect all the cables, all the wind farms together, now in the last page, I did this 10 minutes before leaving the house, so it's not all drawn up the way it should. So not the last page. Towards the end, you'll see that map there. That map there shows, you'll see there's a yellow square about there. If you look carefully, that there is the proposed site for the South Fork wind farm. The blue area adjacent to it is the proposed site for the expanded Revolution Wind, which is the combined projects of Massachusetts and Connecticut. So they're next to one another. Rock Island obviously is over here more. So if they're all going to connect one another, these leases are with other wind farms, Cape Wind and Vineyard Wind. Again, their network is open to be connected with those wind farms as well. So essentially what will happen is that Deepwater Wind will be able to buy the electricity from the other wind farms and send it down the cable to the South Fork via the cable they're installing at Wainscott Beach. That brings me to another question, and that is, I've been concerned about the conduit they've said they're going to build at Wainscott Beach. It's going to be 24 inches, 2 feet in diameter. The cable, at the moment, they're saying it's a 138 kilovolt cable. I believe that cable is around 8-9 inches in diameter. In other words, that conduit can fit 2 or 3 of those cables. And I wonder whether that is by design for potential expansion down the road. Again, it may be one of those things that we're just not told till later on or until we have to work it out ourselves. That the map over the leaf is just a map of the entire area, which includes Block Island and the South Fork, and you can see the states immediately to the north. All that area will be connected, and this is essentially to compensate for the poor transmission system on the South Fork. On the South Fork, you have an old transmission system that LIPA have said they do not want to spend the money to upgrade it. They estimate the upgrading is $500 million. I don't know what really that involves or how accurate that is. Needless to say, LIPA don't want to do it. So the upshot and where all this is going is that we could be in a situation on the South Fork where we have one supplier of electricity. All the cheap wind electricity, wind-generated electricity will be coming via that single cable, which will be controlled by one supplier, Deepwater Wind, feeding electricity to one utility, LIPA, over the one physical cable, which means that there are 3 points of failure, which doesn't make for a very redundant system, and also, in market terms, you'd call that a monopoly. And when a monopoly refuses to disclose the price they're selling electricity for to ratepayers, that is grounds for serious concern. So my before I continue, the only other thing I want to mention is when Deepwater Wind and LIPA says it's only going to cost $1.19, the Inspector General in 2013, as a consequence of the Moreland Commission, said that they tried a similar mathematical trick, except it wasn't $1.19, then it was 1.9%. And that, in the words of the Moreland Commission, thus it appears that LIPA may have known that they were raising the delivery charge by 4.3%, but publicly stating that their increase was only 1.9% to avoid criticism. The Commission concurs with the Inspector General's conclusion. So it sort of shoots a hole, or the credibility, undermines the credibility of their claim that it will only cost $1.19 per customer. I have no idea what that means. I'll be writing to the town board a letter very similar to this one tomorrow, and I'll be recommending, whether the town board listens to my recommendation or not is up to them, but I will be recommending that they do not go ahead and rush in on making any decisions about this project until they know more information, until they know the price, until they know the capacity of the cables, till Deepwater Wind fully disclose to ratepayers, to the trustees, to the fishermen, exactly what is going on, because at this time I really don't know what's going on and I fear the worst. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Scott DeBriner.
Probably going to take me longer to introduce myself and put up my signs than I'm going to be actually standing at the podium. My name is Scott DeBriner. I work at Inner Science Research Associates, and technically my title is Senior Environmental Planner and Landscape Architect. I represent LWJ LLC. I was here 1 month ago. I presented the project. I don't want to waste your time and re-present it again. I noticed that I was on the agenda, so that's why I'm here. I spoke to several of you just prior to the meeting. I don't believe you're going to take any action tonight. However, I decided to stay for the meeting to simply respond to any questions that you may have and to ask you to move forward with this. I believe there may be some issue with waiting to receive some feedback from Brian Frank on this. I've spoken to Brian Frank many times about this, and this proposal is actually a synthesis of my ideas and his ideas. I'm not anticipating hearing formal feedback from Brian on our ZBA application for quite some time. I just know that they're backlogged, and I know that I am not going to be receiving that feedback for some time. That doesn't mean you won't be receiving feedback informally from him, but if we can move it forward, I certainly would appreciate it.
Well, Scott, I think the trustees have tried to establish some working protocols with the town on projects like yours before us tonight, and we seem to be having some success in developing these standards with respect to buffers and upland activities and the impact on the trustee waterways and bottomland. So, to stick with that protocol, it would seem that we would want to hear from Mr. Frank as a first step.
Okay.
So that, again, we're working together with the upland component and the waterways and bottomland component. So that's something that I think most of us or all of us on the board feel is a prudent step, and I think a lot of that came from the work on Georgica Pond, which has been very successful.
Okay.
So that's, just to share with you, that's where it's coming from.
I would be happy to facilitate some sort of communication between your offices, but I don't think that would be a good idea for me to step in and do. So I'll just continue to monitor the agenda and see if I'm on it. When I am on it, I feel an obligation to show up.
We appreciate that very much. And, if we hear something from Brian, we'd be willing to reach out to you. I'm not on the 3 Mile Harbor Committee, but I think getting a contact person on the 3 Mile Harbor Committee would be a good thing for you to do. And
I spoke to Brian a week ago Friday, and he hadn't looked at the ZBA application yet. So I just wanted him to look at it, talk to him about it. I understand what Scott's saying, that Brian was very instrumental in,
some of the planning aspects that
cooperating with the creation of this plan, and I don't expect that there'll be any, problems, but I just didn't want something that Brian had a concern with that might crop up. I didn't want to bring up any kind of a resolution until, he had a chance to look at the actual application.
Do you have a date with the ZBA yet?
Excuse me?
Do you have a date with the ZBA?
No. It's only been a month.
Okay.
You guys got in touch with me I think 3 or 4 days after I submitted the application, which is remarkably great. I hate to say it, it's almost normal not to hear anything back for a month or two from the ZBA, if then. You know, I know that they're backlogged. We have a notice of incomplete from the DEC, a notice of receipt of application from the DEC, no formal comment. The only comments that I've actually had with in terms of a regulatory agency are you guys, and I appreciate that.
Okay, so it's with the committee, John. What's going to happen, Scott, is you're going to see this on the agenda every week until we're ready to move, out of concern that it'll get lost.
How do I not waste our clients' time by showing up?
No, I think, Scott, I think you could reach out to the office.
Okay.
And Arlene could tell you by way of instruction from the clerk or the deputy clerk that it's just on there as a reminder.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that possible, Francis?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay.
Absolutely.
Does that sound good? All right.
I'll do that.
Cool.
Every 2 weeks. Thank you.
And if we speak to Brian and we're on the same page, which I expect, we'll let Arlene know that too, so that it very
There's
well.
no reason why we have to wait for the ZBA.
Yeah.
No,
No,
no.
okay.
I just wanted, I didn't want to go ahead without, them having first even looked at the application.
I'm under the assumption, based upon my communications with Brian, that this is going to go administratively. So we're not going to have a hearing, which is great because sometimes it takes 7 or 8 months just to get a hearing date. Still, even if you half that time, that means we're 4 months away from some sort of a formal action by the ZBA. So I would just ask you to, I think it's prudent on your part to at least speak with him about and get some feedback, but to actually wait for an action from the ZBA, I ask you to maybe think twice about that.
No, I don't think we'll do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott.
Is Brian away?
No, he's back.
He's around.
Just hadn't
Playing catch up?
taken a look at this
Okay.
application yet.
Okay, Rod Richardson? That's okay. Oops, sorry.
I'm a member of the Citizens for Access Rights, and I've been...
Introduce yourself, please.
Rod Richardson is my name.
Hey, Rob, welcome.
Yes, as I mentioned, I'm a member of Citizens for Action Rights, CFAR, and I've been a resident of East Hampton all my life. As some of you may know, there's a beach cleanup on Earth Day that's organized by Dell here, and it's been going on for some years. CFAR has participated by cleaning up the area around Napeague. Some members suggested that, maybe it would be a good idea to expand our scope to Hicks Island, which is that an area which probably has not received any beach cleanup for a long time because there are what seem to us to be illegal signs that are up there that are preventing people from accessing the trustee-owned beach. So we decided to go do a cleanup, and with the blessing from Tim Taylor, the president of CFAR, and Dell, we organized a cleanup. Born on a paddleboard. So I have here some write-up of that, which you can pass around, of what happened. And I wanted to report to you, what we found, because those signs that prevent public access over there also prevent, citizens of East Hampton from getting their eyes on what's actually going on Hicks Island. there was a tremendous amount of trash there. Probably more than on any other beach because of the fact that nobody's been over there to clean it up. There were pieces of styrofoam that were the size of small megaliths over there. There was a lot of, this should be a sanctuary for birds, and yet there was trash like nets and plastic mesh that could, be fatal to birds. I wanted to, show you, these are some of the signs that are up there. Now, these signs say bird sanctuary.
They don't, usually a sign that's an official sign references the agency that put the sign up.
Right. None of these signs have any agency reference. None of them.
Does anybody, because this predates me getting on this committee, does anybody know where those signs came from?
You probably ask Tommy Dash.
Yeah, I think it came from the state park.
Yeah, but no, state signs.
think
I
they-
mean, they're
Particularly state
a
signs.
state sign typically
Are labeled.
is labeled, and they follow a specific format.
And they would make a
Format
reference to
both in
the-
font and color,
Yeah, these are
and
little-
this does neither.
No. Almost looks like a custom sign.
It does.
Yeah.
And let me point out to you a couple things about this. Number one, this is on the beach. That beach is owned by you. It's owned by the trustees. Okay? And your primary mission, as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, is to protect public access to the beaches. Right? Now, this is on the beach, and it's denying public access. So it's trespassing on your property and denying your mission right there. And these signs are all over there. One of the aspects of the foreshore is that people are supposed to be able to land their boats on it. It's a right, okay? It's not just for East Hampton, it's for everywhere. But they say no boat landing. So these signs were put up by somebody who has no knowledge of the public trust doctrine or the right to the foreshore, the very thing that you guys are supposed to be protecting. So if you look at this picture here, you'll see that the rack line is above this sign. So this is squarely on trustee property. I think that, one of the things that was apparent when I was over there cleaning up was that there simply were no terns. There were no plovers at all over there. You would have thought I would have seen one or two, but there were none. I dug into a DEC report on Napeague, and apparently that cut was closed in 2006, and they made an attempt to open it up, but it failed, and then they did nothing, right? So that report says that there were, let's see, 70, there were 35 mating pairs, 70 lease terns, and another 106 mating pairs, or 212 common terns. And the report notes that the tern colony was eliminated because that cut was closed, because the foxes and the raccoons got over there and ate the birds. So the very purpose of the DEC having control of that to keep it a sanctuary failed. That is a complete failure of their conservation mission, as well as being a failure of their obligation under New York State policy to preserve public access, which they have failed to do by allowing these signs to be up there. And you guys, as far as I hope you will agree with me, you should not permit those signs to stay up on your land, because that, once this is being drawn to your attention, that would make you liable for a breach of public trust if that continues. So my recommendations, on the back of this, I put some simple recommendations for what should be done. And I hope you'll agree with me and discuss this. But I believe that the DEC has breached the public trust in multiple ways. They've breached New York State policy regarding public access, regarding scenic access with the land they've dumped there that has destroyed the view over to the across Napeague Bay to the Bell Estate Cliffs, which you used to be able to see from the landing over there. That view's gone. They've closed the cut, destroying the conservation. They've breached the trust as far as public access. They should voluntarily step down for the stewardship of this. Important gem in our town, it should be in local hands. It should be overseen by you guys, I believe. So I would hope that the governor, Senator Duval, Representative Thiel, town officials would all help them come to this decision. And you guys should speak up about this, I hope. But more immediately, those signs are on your beach. You have every authority to go in there and take down those signs that breach the public trust, that deny public access. I'd further suggest that because the public has been misinformed for so long about their rights, the public is confused about what their rights are to public access. I believe you should put up very simple signs that inform the public of what their signs are. I would suggest you put up signs there on the foreshore of Hicks Island and maybe in the parking lot across there that are similar, and maybe at other beaches too. And the Hicks sign, my suggestion is, it's not hard and fast, but say, welcome to Hicks Island, an East Hampton Town Trustee beach. The public is welcome to land upon and enjoy this and all of their local beaches. Upland areas are a bird sanctuary. Please stay out of the dunes where birds nest and ticks infest. And leave it at that. I want to point out to you, by the way, there is no contradiction between access to that foreshore, that beach, and conservation. There's no, that foreshore is, the beach on Hicks Island is 100% foreshore. The rack line is up there right at the grass, and in some cases it goes well into the grass. So you own quite a lot of that, and you should probably do a map that traces out the rack line on that to figure out what you really do control. But the point is, birds don't nest on the beach on Hicks Island. If they nest, and there are no birds there right now, but if they nest up in the dunes, on the sandy areas in the dunes. They don't nest on the beach because they would drown. At a very high tide, they would drown. Evolutionarily, they've learned, don't nest there. They don't nest there. So, every other place where we do bird conservation here in East Hampton, passage along the foreshore is allowed. The nets do not go into the water. The fences don't go into the water, or when they do, people say, hey, wait a minute, you're going too far, and they take them back. There is no contradiction between allowing the public the passage on the foreshore, the traditional rights, and conservation. And indeed, conservation is enhanced by allowing public access. By letting nature lovers go there, they will pick up the trash. They'll keep an eye on the problems. They'll see what's going on. There are plenty of people who are community-minded in this town, like Dell and others, who clean up. But having signs like that and intimidate people, they don't clean. So how are we going to teach our children to love nature if our children are excluded from nature? How are we going to do that? So, I would plead with you to, like this may seem like a minor matter, and you've got other big, Deepwater wind is so important, but this is important too. This is a direct, in-your-face, disrespect of the trustees' rights that's going on here. That people have just said, oh, I guess.
Rob, you've made yourself crystal clear on that front, and we appreciate and we understand what our responsibilities are. And we'll look forward to addressing this very closely.
All right.
Thank you.
And timely. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Well, I do want to remind you, I mentioned this once before to you guys last year. Nothing's happened yet. But I hope you do that.
For that. We'll take care of it.
Well, great. Thank you very much. I look forward to that.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Rod.
Any questions, by the way?
This is your phone number here?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Maybe we can get together, maybe paddle over there and take a look.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Okay. Great. I'd like to join you and do that.
I have an extra paddle ordered, or
Okay.
2 or 3 if you guys need.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Rod.
Thank you.
You know the way, right?
I know the way.
I'll have to go by.
Okay. Next on the list, Charles Brennan? Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No more fossil fuels.
Good evening, Board. Chuck Bowman, Land Use Ecological Services.
Hey, Chuck.
How are you? But before I get to it, if I could just ask one question about another different subject. My volunteer job, I'm president of the Riverhead Foundation, Marine Mammal Rescue Program, sea turtles. And we've been talking about reinstituting the pound net program that we used to have, where we would be in contact with the baymen to tag, and instead of the baymen just releasing the turtles, they get caught in the pound net. You know that we get a lot of sea turtles in our bays, tremendous amount, Kemp Ridleys most importantly, which are endangered. So, you know, we'd like to be able to contact both, and we have the Southampton Trustees and your board, to see if there's a contact person that could help us. You guys know who are, you know, who you issue permits to for pound nets, and that would be helpful. We're actually looking for grant money from the state and from NOAA to do this work. So it was very successful, but then the money ran out, so we're trying to reinstitute it. So if you could just give me a person, you know, that would be great to contact for the help of looking into it and be able to help us with the list of baymen.
Chuck, I can send you a couple names tomorrow.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you.
I think the only permits we issue are within the harbors, though. You know, I think all the
Yeah,
permits on the
we can get you
Yeah,
hooked
but
up.
you know
Bay
what?
are
There's a couple guys that represent the baymen. They can
get
put
the
you in
baymen.
touch.
Oh, no, that's what we're just doing, because, you know, all of our records are
They can put
old,
you in touch
you know,
with the guys.
and a lot of people have gone out of business, you know. There's some new people, but that,
No, I think we can get you hooked up with.
no.
Still remember getting those dolphins.
I support your.
Well, thank you very much. We had 300 people at a seal release just on Earth Day on Sunday.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Down in Ponquag, you know. But anyway, I'm here to talk about Phragmites and Skylight. I've had numerous conversations with Rick and with Jim.
And so, what do you, with the turtles now, you just receive them from them and?
For the pound
assess them?
net, you know, we have 11 turtles in-house right now in our rescue center in Riverhead. Those were from Colston this fall. So as the waters warm up, we'll get permission to release them back in. We keep them. And in fact...
With the ones that are just in the pound traps, do they just sometimes just need
Oh, they just need to be
assessment,
released. But we like to tag them so we can keep track of them. Some will put satellite tags on. We have grant money in to buy satellite tags, so we can actually see where they're going. We get a lot of juvenile turtles, which is interesting, mostly
Are any,
breeds.
I'm sorry, are any of the turtles tagged associated with O-Search?
No. No. No, these are ours. We have our own database, which we share with NOAA and actually whoever else wants. In fact, I was talking to Chris.
Because they have turtles
You know,
that they have tagged as well.
Yeah, we've been working with Stony Brook quite, and I say Chris is very helpful, you know.
Still remember chasing those dolphins around with you.
Oh, yeah, yes, that. Well, I like to forget that.
Yeah, that didn't work very well.
Wasn't for lack of effort, though.
No,
okay?
it's not. It's interesting, such as being a volunteer. You know, so, but anyway, any help that would be really terrific. You know, that you guys could give. Like I was telling you, we have 11 sea turtles in-house now, and so we will be waiting and probably getting permission to do some releases actually out here in Aquaponic and other places where we picked them up.
This gives you a chance to see if they've been tagged before also, right?
Oh, sure, yeah, and you know, it's what I was getting to is we've been working with NOAA to become a regional center. So Cape Cod and New England, they get a lot of cold stuns, far more than we do. The water turns colder much quicker, and they have no facilities really to keep the Mystic. Will take some, but we have some really large tanks that we use for seals. you know, the seal population's increasing tremendously. So we're taking less and less seals. It's almost got to the point that it's like saving deer, you know? You know, there's so many seals now. So we're trying to convert some of those tanks to holding tanks for turtles.
Were you part of the rescue for the manatee that was up in Cape Cod?
We
Remember
weren't.
that?
No, we were watching it, you know. We've had manatees on Long Island, you know.
Right. But this one, it was getting very cold up there, and it wasn't leaving the
Well, they're all young animals, the manatees, and again, we get notified because they follow them, you know. And it's always a young male who's like gone off someplace where he shouldn't be. Go figure, you know.
It's his right.
Chuck,
It's in his nature.
when we talk about Phragmites,
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'd rather talk about turtles, you know. You know.
We would also.
As I was getting to, Jim and Rick, we've had some field visits here. I have a client, you know, we had proposed a 25-foot buffer. It's a Phragmites removal project. We would be excavating out the rhizomes, replanting, bringing in clean fill. We had finished a project, now it's 2 years ago, just adjacent, one house adjacent on Lafayette that turned out really well. I have a great respect for Jim and Rick, and we've had some conversations about the width of the buffer that you wanted. We had proposed 25 feet. Jim and Rick had suggested 30 feet. So we're talking about a 5-foot difference. And our client basically refused, you know, said, I'm not giving up another 5 feet of my property, which to me, and I'll be honest with you, it sounds stupid. You know, I mean, it's, you know, it's a very big piece of property, and it's 5 feet. I know he is a benefactor of the Georgia Foundation, you know, and he thinks he's contributed a lot to, you know, what Chris was talking about. And he was adamant that he didn't want to give up the other 5 feet. He was willing to spend the money on the Phragmites removal, which, by the way, we do all over Long Island with a lot of success. I'm a proponent of trying to return native shorelines, get rid of the Phragmites, and the state and the towns don't have money really, or much money, to be able to do that work. So if we can get owners to do it, and it can be done properly, and I put that in quotes, properly, and monitored, that it's a good project to get these owners that can afford it to do it correctly. So where we are right now is that we have a DEC approval, we have a Department of State approval, and Army Corps approval for the project in front of. I had said that we would certainly eliminate some of the grass species that Jim had suggested we eliminate, mainly red fescue, and substitute something else. It was also suggested that we put some woody vegetation in. Our client also objected to that. What I intended to do, I hope, because we still don't have a village approval. The village approval was submitted, but on their calendar, we probably are not going to get on till July, you know? You know, so I don't know if there's a possibility to table this until we have the village approval, or whether the 30 feet is cut in stone, and whether or not I can go back and you know, again, maybe try and clump some woody vegetation.
If I,
you know.
hey, Chuck, if maybe I could speak to this application.
Oh, sure, no,
a little bit, because I feel like the presentation slightly slanted. We've looked at this project actually twice now, Rick and I. Okay, the proposal as it stands is for the mechanical excavation of the Phragmites and the existing shoreline vegetation. Now, this is a site that was prior to this was a vacant, I'd call it meadow. It was mowed once a year. There was no irrigation. There was no fertilization of the property. Presently, it's a complete build-out. It's a nice big house with a proposal for a nice big lawn. Now, the property slopes rather significantly down to the water, all right? Concerns are this, okay? If this were in the town of East Hampton, they'd be asking for a 50-foot wide buffer. The village is trying to adopt a consistency of 30 feet, all right? Phragmites is an invasive plant, okay, but it performs a function. It acts as a nitrogen trap, whether you like the plant or not. Now, the issue with Phragmites is it overtakes any of the other growth. Okay, so we've had a policy over the last several years that we don't simply issue permits for the removal of Phragmites. We look at what's going on in the upland portions of the site, and given the situation here, we felt that a 30-foot wide buffer was certainly prudent. The application as it stands, and it is approved by the DEC in this situation, has a variety of grasses which were selected solely for their ultimate growing height, okay? We have, in this application, we have a proposal for roughly 600 one-gallon Festuca rubra. And if you're familiar with lawn grasses, red fescue is a common lawn grass. Does not make it a bad plant, but it's probably inappropriate to put your lawn in a bucket and plant it in gallon sections. Typically, you would call that sod in some cases. What we've asked for, and the applicant's sponsor has denied, is a predominantly shrubby border that would be consistent with what you would naturally find on this shoreline, that will act to capture nutrients, it'll act as habitat for wildlife, and hopefully will discourage the use of a lawnmower and stuff through here. The application as it stands has every appearance of, I want to run my lawn down to the water, okay? And Chuck, there's nothing about this, and we've had this discussion, there's nothing about this application that says something different, okay?
Right, but Jim, I also have volunteered to remove the red fescue, okay? And also...
But Chuck, the red fescue wasn't really... The red fescue was more the example of sort of how blatant this is, that we're trying to run the lawn down to the water. And, you know, come on. We just sat through a presentation by Dr. Gobler where the goal of the Friends of Georgia, the very organization that your client is giving so generously to, okay, is to limit the amount of nitrogen here. I have no doubts that there'll be an irrigation system on this property that will be wall to wall. And you know what? What allows us, what conveys that nitrogen into our waterways, it doesn't walk in there on its own. It doesn't blow in there. It's conveyed by water. And in this case, it's conveyed by irrigation water. The only thing I would ask here is, yes, I would ask the other board members to support me, that we would try and keep that 30-foot buffer. And the other thing the other issue I had here is there was nothing natural or native about this. This was merely a collection of native plants installed along what could be a decent shoreline. And the lay of this land, it's obvious, you've said it, there is no loss of view here by having a regular border, a regular buffer.
No, and what I was suggesting is that, and you mentioned that the village is heading towards a 30-foot setback, you know, so rather than put the onus on this board, if that's the way it turns out, I don't have a problem with the 30-foot buffer, you know. Okay, let's put that out there. I think I've told you that.
But you have a problem with doing a 30-foot buffer and the plants composed in that buffer being a plants that you would naturally find as shoreline plants in this circumstance.
Well, that's where I look to the Mallow project that turned out, I think you would agree, you know, it turned out very, very well. You know, it was intensely planted. There was limited amount of shrubs. there was a clear demarcation of where that buffer area started, which gets to me where your thoughts are. And I agree with you. You don't want things moved. I deal with this all over Long Island, and we suggest many times that a very low, like a split rail fence or some demarcation be at that buffer area so that the landscapers from this huge, beautiful house don't keep going further and further towards the shoreline, mowing it. And you're right with that. So.
And I don't have an issue, Chuck. I don't have an issue with your client actually maintaining his view corridor by maintaining those plants. If he was a really big duck, I think what he would really be great is to actually observe something that was real and measurable, like a 75-foot no fertilization zone that would be very similar to the management scheme that went on this property for ages.
If this was in Southampton and it was a vacant lot, we'd have a 75-foot buffer, a non-disturbance buffer, that we'd probably have to put a planting plan in. So that's what I'm saying with the 30 feet. I don't have a problem with the 30 feet. So that's where we start. But I think and we can remove the fescues, from it. And I think you had suggested that we seed switchgrass, and that's fine. No problem with it. It really comes down to the owner, which is, you and I have talked, can be difficult sometimes, and that we could have native shrubs, but have them either maybe in a clump formation and not a solid wall of them.
No, I think that's it, Chuck. I think it's all doable.
Okay. So
that's, to me, to satisfy my committee and hopefully this board. That's what we.
So I'd ask that maybe we could just table this and let me talk to him. And again, we're not going to do it before the village until probably 2020,
But Chuck, we looked at this around Christmas time.
Absolutely.
The plan hasn't changed.
Well, that's because
I don't really understand why you submitted it.
Well, I can tell you why my client told me I had to submit it.
All right, well,
okay,
you did your job.
You work for private clients.
I know.
You do everything. Sometimes you don't do it. They don't listen to you sometimes.
All right.
Right? Am I right?
Yeah. The topography on this place is something that a 5-foot tall shrub would not interfere with the
It
view?
wouldn't interfere. And, this is very, very different than the project over on La Forest. The project on La Forest was very, very gently sloping into the lake there. So the buffer that was created, even though it was predominantly a grassland buffer, actually does a very, very good job of mitigating.
But it also comes down, any of these projects, comes down to supervision during the planting and maintenance, we've seen projects that sounded great on paper, and then it got put in, and then the people decide, well, I'm not going to pay, for the maintenance of it, and all of a sudden it's Phragmites again,
Or something else.
Or something else. So, I get it, believe me. So.
Hey, Chuck, thanks for coming.
All right.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Appreciate the update.
Thank you.
Okay, and
I will.
last but not least, Elizabeth Holliday.
Hello, thank you. Hello. Thank you for seeing me. It's a blessing and a curse to go last. I've certainly been inspired to speak on a couple of things from what I've heard today. I've been a part of rescuing a seal and a sea turtle, turning it back and having it get tagged. So I'm a huge participant out in the water. I've lived in the Hampton.
Name for the record, please.
My name is Elizabeth Halliday from Amagansett.
Okay, welcome. Sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
And I go out on paddleboard and swimming, et cetera, out in Nepegue and mostly along Gardiner's Bay. So I'm familiar with Hicks Island and was inspired to speak about the trash cleanup and Earth Day in general. It brings to the fore environmental issues even beyond that which we deal with on a regular basis out here. The recent trash pickups only highlight the need for greater beach management. One easy fix to prevent the collection, the accumulation of trash on some of our beaches is to install more and bigger trash cans and have them picked up on a more frequent basis. And volunteer cleanup days similar to CFAR and other organizations can be conducted not only on Earth Day, but other days as well. Spending time on Hicks Island, it's actually no longer an island, it's a peninsula. And recently I saw a dead raccoon on the beach, and no doubt the raccoon was there, probably eating some waterfowl eggs. And the idea of having that island as a bird sanctuary is kind of becoming a joke, since it's now making these animals more vulnerable to other predators. I'm sure there are tremendous wildlife experts out here. I just went to an Earth Day celebration in Dallas called Earth X, largest Earth Day celebration in the country, and I was seated next to someone from the Delta Waterfowl Management. I'd be happy to assist in getting their Long Island liaison if you'd need any assistance in how to preserve the bird population in the wetlands from these predators. I would also here mostly to voice my strong and unwavering support for the Deepwater wind farm. I attended the meeting a couple of weeks ago at the library and found it surprisingly contentious. I support the state's decision to go forward with the wind farm and its vendor, Deepwater. Rising ocean temperatures and plastic debris pose a far greater threat to marine life and the fishermen's livelihood than the wind farm. These concerns raised by the fishermen, as well as other people here tonight, will be moot if the shellfish can't reproduce, if corals bleaches, if we have widespread species collapse brought on by ocean acidification. Some of the concerns, like I can't drive my boat through a space a mile wide marked by 600 feet goalposts, for fear that someone might catch a net on the bottom, seem to be a small price to pay to taking carbon out of the air. And even if the proposed wind farm can't handle 100% of the load immediately, perhaps the room for expanding additional cables would mean that it's intending to take on a greater load in the future once it gets up and running. Scrapping the plan and starting over, or delaying the construction process or even the permitting process due to fears of that which I just mentioned, or any other thing that anybody can think of, they seem to be missing the larger point that we can't handle the air temperature getting so warm and the water temperature getting so warm due to the excessive damage it will cause to human life, all the animals, as well as the flora. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay. Anybody else want to address the board? No? Okay. We'll move on to new business. Georgica Ponds, we have an application of Gallo for a trustee permit
That
for
we just
Phragmites management.
discussed.
That's the one we just discussed? Okay.
Who would like the survey back?
Is that Gallo?
Yeah.
I'd like that, because I don't have a copy of the survey.
Okay.
So there's more, okay.
I had a full package at one point. You're welcome to have it.
I'd like to go visit.
Rick, do you have on Gallo, do you have the Ed Hollander plan and stuff for that? Because I don't.
You're welcome to have that. Sir.
Okay, thanks.
This is your property,
Yes.
Phragmites, so I would like to go and visit this property, just take a peek.
Sure.
Can I arrange that with you?
Well, it's not to arrange with me. I don't.
The homeowner?
This is the agent. The agent.
The agent, oh, he's gone.
Okay.
Land use.
Land use.
I mean, the issue I have with this thing is it's just, it's a little like the windmills It sounds good initially until you start looking into it, and, you know, we're not doing anything for the pond here. This was strictly a, let me improve my view kind of thing, and if I can run my sod lawn down to the water, as a consequence to that. And that's the way the plan reads. And, you know, if we're gonna issue permits for people to conduct activities in our pond bottoms, I think there should be a real and measurable benefit to the pond at the end of the day. And that's been our sort of the bar that we set. And this is not the first application that we didn't feel that simply coming in and saying that you were proposing to remove Phragmites was a noble enough gesture. I mean, it's got to be coupled with a net improvement. I don't know how the DEC reviewed this project, because clearly there were some things that were glaring and noticeable. The plant selections, due to the soil type, due to the exposures, due to the situation, were inappropriate. The only thing that was consistent and common to the plants selected were their ultimate growth height of under 12 inches.
Jim, do you have any reason to suspect that the village won't be enforcing there?
Well, I've been in contact with Billy Hayjack. He definitely supports the 30 feet.
But there's 50.
The village's code is any activities within 125 foot of the water body are their jurisdiction.
Right.
Now, typically, they have not been asking for 50 feet. Typically, the village has been asking for 30 feet, and that has only happened since Billy's been working for the board. Before that, some applications had no requirements.
Right.
Some had 20. There was no rhyme or reason to the depth of any buffers, if there were any buffers.
Is it written into their code at all?
I think it's a matter of just getting into some consistent policy. I don't know that it is in their code.
I guess, well, the code gives them 125 feet.
They got
so what they do
jurisdiction on
within that
125 feet.
can be anything.
So they don't have a standard requirement
Yeah,
of
and
a
Bill has
50-foot buffer.
expressed that on the initial permitting for the building permits on this property, they occurred just as he was getting hired on. So he wasn't part of the review process there. You know, had he been, some of this stuff might have been worked out prior to any application for Phragmites removal. That might have been a contingent, you know, a condition of the building permit.
I mean, everybody's learning a lot about the value of having the proper plants down there.
Yeah.
It's time we use that now.
I mean, the thing that I took real exception at, and Chuck did mention it here tonight, is he said this over the phone, that my client has given a lot of money to the Friends of Georgica Pond.
To help the pond.
And consequently, I put my money in the collection plate.
Yeah.
I should be able to sin a little bit.
Commit a little venial sin once in a
that's-
while.
No, I think we need to stand firm on this.
Okay, well, that was my.
I have a quick question. With regards to what we're trying to get accomplished here, are these recommendations, or are they in fact things that we're saying, if they're not done or agreed upon, you will not get a permit from us?
When Rick and I had the discussion with Chuck around Christmas time, the dialogue was that these changes would be incorporated into a new iteration of this plan. They were not, okay? And I don't, you know, right now, if you go down there, there isn't much to look at. There is a shoreline that's kind of dominated, unfortunately, by non-native plants. But once you get past, you know, the stuff, the emergent vegetation, the 2,400 3 square and stuff, and these are the plants that are actually planted in the water, and they emerge from the water. Okay, I have no issues with that, okay? It's the buffer area, okay, where we had 300 red fescue as 1 gallon container. We have some marsh milkweed, and Eragrostis spectabilis, which is purple love grass, or that, 300 of them. Okay, purple love grass, when it flowers, it gets about 4 inches tall, okay? When it's in leaf, the leaves don't usually get any more than 1 to 2 inches tall. All of the plants that were selected here were selected with the same criteria. And you know what? What's sad is, you got a property that the house sits well above the water. I want to see every square inch of water that I can see, and it doesn't give anything, any of the animal life on the pond, any sense of privacy. And I don't think what this guy realizes is when you create one of these gentle slopes going down to the water, the only thing that you invite up into your yard is Canada geese, okay? And basically what you get is a wall-to-wall goose shit sandwich, okay? And that's basically, so there is some real benefits to the homeowner if
Does seem to be their favorite habitat.
No, if you could recognize that.
He was mentioning the removal of red fescue, so
Removing it from the plant list, and typically...
But isn't that indigenous? It says
red fescue is an indigenous grass, and if you're doing seeding work in wetland buffer areas, the DEC typically will say seed with red fescue as a cool season cover, and introduce any other native grasses, warm season grasses with it. I thought it was kind of a novel approach to take the red fescue, grow it into 1 gallon containers. It's kind of a little like planting sod in little squares.
Right. Sort of a...
Have the trustees, as a board, formally communicated with the village about
Yes,
these?
I've been in regular communication with Billy Ajak on this project specifically.
Do you think it would benefit the situation if we, as a board, a clerk wrote a letter, you helped draft a letter and send it to the mayor? I mean, it's kind of...
It could. I don't think it could hurt. I mean, the village has been an unusual board when it comes to matters of management of the shorelines.
It hasn't been as standardized as perhaps the town.
It's gotten a lot better.
They're certainly involved with Georgia Bond.
Yeah. No, they've had a strong presence there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they're getting caught up.
Have the neighbors had any objections to this plan, or is there any discussion among?
The DEC reviewed it. They don't, when you get a DEC permit, it isn't like going for the ZBA. And I think part of the reason that perhaps they've waited to make the village applications is the village application will be handled very, very much the way the ZBA in the town is. All of the neighbors are notified. Keep in mind here, the neighbors on this property is the one between this property and the Mallow property, Bartos, is somewhat cleared down to the water, and you know what it is? It's a pre-existing non-conforming situation. It's very difficult until they come in with applications before the boards to get them into any kind of current compliance.
Okay.
Well, it just occurred to me that the DEC is one party we have not had this conversation with.
No.
And maybe we should.
And I'm going to tell you, to see how they take certain applications and run them through the ringer. And this is the second application that's gotten DEC approval that has a plant list that doesn't have any relevance to the soils, the aspect, or the type of site.
And
maybe if
what
we
should we
explain to
attribute
them
that
what
to?
we're trying to do.
I don't know.
I mean, if they're not indigenous, how
They're
is
indigenous.
They are indigenous.
But you know what? Just because a plant is native to, let's say, East Hampton,
doesn't mean it's going to do the job that's necessary.
A gross example is you're not going to find beach grass growing in the middle of a swamp. Okay? There's just there's the right spot, and we had that today. We went and looked at a project today where the prospective applicant was lamenting the fact that all the beach grass died because he planted it in the water. Okay.
That's the next one on the agenda, Jim, so we'll
All
have a
right.
chance to speak to that.
All right. Can we move on?
Yeah, please.
All right, application of Rifkin Core Log Shoreline Repair.
Okay, here we go. Can I just stay with it?
Please.
Okay.
I was just introducing it.
If everybody here is familiar with what core logs are,
Yes.
Yes, I
okay,
learned last
they
week.
look like dinosaur dung, okay. It's coconut fiber logs. Now, this property, the applicant's contractor installed these things with a permit from the trustees several years ago. The installation was very successful, but the one thing that is completely absent here is typically you'll have that slope down to not quite the water's edge. You'll get that grassy area between the upland portion and sort of the high tide line of a plant called Spartina or Salte in Distinguished. It's absent here, okay? And I don't think the people took it out. I think it just got scoured out over time. The guy said that when he tried to do the application several years ago, he wanted to use a material called core fiber mats or plant pallets, they're sometimes called. And this board at that time said no, they were too bulky, they were too invasive, they really, you don't have this, I think the board at the time misunderstood the use of this. What happens is when you're trying to establish plants like Spartina patens in particular, you'll get geese, you'll get puddle duck will come in, and they'll do basically a process of like churning. They'll sit there like they're churning butter, and they'll paddle their feet on the bottom, and they'll fan all of the sand out from the root system of the plant. Then they reach down, they yank the plant out of the ground, and they eat it. Okay? So, when you're trying to establish these things, you have to exclude the waterfowl for a period of time, which is not easy.
So how is it done?
Well, you can
What they
set
did at
up
Pussy's Pond, for
fences and wires, and I gotta tell you, it sucks. Okay,
eyesore.
well, what you can do, and we've done this in my own business at times, is you have these core mats, they're about 3 or 4 inches thick. They plant them with the plants that you're trying to establish. They grow them for several months beforehand in a controlled situation, and you put them down similarly to the way you would put down sod, except you stake them into the bottom. And what it does do is it does a couple things. It absorbs the windblown wave activity, okay, keeps the plants in place. Most importantly, the geese hate it because what it does is it mimics that natural shoreline that you get where the Spartina is growing so thick that it forms like a sod. And that's what we spoke to the guy today. He's going to come back with a modified application for something that's more appropriate to what he's trying to do. And the guy was very enthusiastic. It seems like his client is very enthusiastic. So I think this has the potential of being a good project.
And he's working with Bruce a little bit too on the
And he's
Phragmites.
working with Bruce.
So it's overall an opportunity to see a nice management plan in place. We did notice a project across the cove that seems to be in violation, and they put down some kind of white sandbags along the front of their property
Poly
abut
sandbags.
sod that then goes all the way up to the house. So that one needs to be looked at. That's unfortunate to see such a blatant violation and such a beautiful property just kind of really devalued with
Is it in the village or the town?
It's in the
town. So that needs to be looked at in the near future, so we're going to get the address for that and explore how and why that's come about.
What cove is this on?
That was, in Eel Cove, which is by the launch area, the kayak and sailboat launch and mooring area.
All right. Napeag Lazy Point, a request from Ham and Rich Maury for installation of a wood deck on Lot 32S and 33S.
Okay. I looked at this last week with the Mores. This was a property that we had some dealings with earlier this year. It was the old Chinialarco house. And if you recall, when she was trying to get her COs together to sell the place, it was discovered that the house portion of the deck and a fence were actually on a neighboring property that she had never been paying rent on. So the solution we came up with at the time was just lease another lot.
Because she was trying to close quickly.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that was agreed upon, and quite frankly, I had hoped that we would continue that policy where we have property owners that are using really multiple lots. I went and looked at this the other day. They were asking to they were offering to take the fence down on the neighboring lot. And I pointed out, well, are you willing to take the concrete patio and the corner of the house off the lot too, which they were less enthusiastic about. So I suggested, but I would have to come back to this board, that perhaps the solution would be to lease them 1.5 lots, which would basically keep all of the existing structures that are pre-existing. We'd be getting a little bit more money, but they're using a little bit more land. And they said that they felt that would be perhaps fair and amenable. Now, the other thing they've got going on there is they would like to take and do two things. They want to cover this existing concrete patio, where right now there is a deck, stoop, and then you step down onto the patio, which I'm going to be honest with you, isn't very safe because the patio's not very big, so it's kind of a trip hazard. It's the same footprint. They're not looking to expand. They're really just looking to leave the concrete patio and just build a deck over the top of it, which has been done at many of the houses down there.
Would it be attached onto the actual house itself, the residence?
Yeah, it's the same footprint of the concrete
Right, but it's
patio.
literally attached to the house. It's a fixed structure.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Okay.
any requirements for the type of materials to be used?
Well, I think the requirements,
In
for the
Lazy
type
Point, I
of
don't
the
know.
materials, we would like to see the deck material not be a treated material. And what they have on the stoop is number 2 cedar, 5/4 cedar, which is, I think, what they would want to do. The other thing that they want to do is they would like to actually do a little bit of a roof deck on the house. Again, it's within the footprint, and again, it appears that we have approved some of these things in the past. I've never handled one, but that's basically sums up what they're asking to do.
Do they have a sketch or a survey or any preliminary documents
I think they're
associated with this?
putting that together.
Okay.
They need to, because they're going to need a building permit for the deck. They're going to need a building permit for the thing, so they will need to submit.
And perhaps a new survey to split the lot, et cetera.
Well, the survey just shows the 2 lots and the fact that it heads over onto the other one.
Survey shows it's all ours, basically. What's going to happen to the other half of the lot? Is that just going to be attached?
It's not, you know what, right now,
This
the
is
other
this
half
one,
of the
but
property,
their property
okay, it's
versus
not
this one.
cleared.
There is
Okay, so it's not like the whole lot, the whole property is cleared and they've been using it. It's,
So we've been
Well, I don't think
renting
they're
other second.
expanding anything.
yeah.
Okay.
So it's like what? It's not a lot of money, right?
Well, I mean, what do we get? We get roughly $1,700 a year on a regular lot.
So she want to pay
Okay.
half of that?
So they don't want to pay $3,400 a year. They'd like to pay less.
25, 50 or
Do
something.
rent half lots?
Hey, listen, we're breaking new ground. We don't usually rent 2 lots, but these things have come up
Number of them
where
have two
somebody,
lots.
there's a number of
Some have
homes
half
down
lots.
there that have kind of utilized multiple pieces of property, but they've been paying one rent bill. I didn't feel last year that it was appropriate to go back to these people and hit them up now, but when properties are changing hands, and it's a new owner, and the values that these properties have traded at, I don't think it's a hardship to collect.
And I might add, we're not allowing any new construction down there. So
No.
that lot in question will remain the way it is.
Yeah,
You know,
but I
put-
thought if we were looking,
Half the lot.
The half, yeah.
if we were looking to kind of meet them halfway, we would rent them half a lot.
What happens with the other half vacant lot then? Is it
Stays,
usable?
stays.
Or it's in perpetuity then just an open
Right.
space?
Is there any condition there for not expanding into the
We'd have
half
to
lot?
write that,
Give
we
them-
would have to write that language into their lease. Because clearly, if they expand into, let's say they do a vegetable garden or something, and all of a sudden they're farming the back 40, that would be a different situation.
But there's a little time with all this planning and documents
I
being
think
prepared.
there's- I think
So we can
there-
table
yeah,
this for
yeah.
further
Yeah, it just
consideration.
seems to me that, I can understand the situation, but if people are gonna, lease a half a lot because their
Well-
corner of their house is a little over the line.
Well, this is, but you know what, this
They're
is.
gonna get a free
but hang on,
half-lot buffer.
But hang on. What's happened is, these are the conditions that we, as a board, inherit, because this isn't something that happened yesterday.
This
has been going on.
This has been going on forever. We
Yeah.
tried to
And I mean,
resolve
we
the
have
situation.
we have another situation down there, which I think I feel like we should address, and that is, well, actually two, okay? One is we have people using lots down there that I don't think the trustees get anything for, that are using them to store fishing gear, using them to store other stuff. And personally,
We don't rent those lots for
What's
that
that?
purpose? We don't rent the lots for that
I don't know,
purpose?
do we rent any vacant lots down there for the purpose?
No.
I think we should, and for no other purpose than to know who's using it, how much space you could take up, and what the hell you're putting there, because you know what? As sort of the stewards of this property, if somebody's storing something like fuel or something where you get a leak or that, this is real liabilities. And then there's the very last thing related to Lazy Point that I don't want to really push tonight, but one of the things that we lament many times is the type of person that's buying in that area nowadays. When we were kids, the people that bought in Lazy Point were kind of starter homes. They were people that didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't trade at a very high value. Well, that isn't the case anymore. Like every other piece of real estate in town, these things are trading on the waterfronts up to $1 million, okay, for a piece of property that you don't own. You only own the house. Now, who else can afford to come in and be a cash buyer? Because you can't get a mortgage on these things. So perhaps something to consider is to have leases that the terms are long enough that the owners could actually borrow against them, and it would give the little old lady that might like to see one of her relatives or something come into that property, but the relative doesn't have the money to fix the house up, can't get a mortgage to fix the house up, it would give that person the opportunity to perhaps keep this as a working class household. It's not a lot, guys, but it's something that I think it would lower our bookkeeping costs by giving these people some equity that they could borrow against, some of the older owners it would be helpful to. And
I think if we can help them, then that's a very good
And
idea.
community approach to managing
I
the
think
How
property.
long is a long-term lease, though?
Well, I think it's gonna be 5 years longer than a mortgage.
35 or
Okay,
40.
So
So
you'd
it's
have
like,
to do
well,
something,
15-year mortgage, so 20.
you'd have to do something at least 20 years to do it.
It gives people security.
Well, it gives people,
And-
people some
It'll
security.
open it up to other people who don't have the $1 million cash to lay down on the table. But maybe they can get the mortgage.
But guys, what I think if we do this, I think what we have to have in place is a better worded lease with our conditions more clearly and neatly spelled out. Because if you read the rules and regulations for Lazy Point, they spend an enormous amount of time discussing your residency requirements. And I've been told by other members of this board that you're not allowed irrigation systems, you're not allowed this, and you're not allowed that. Well, there's only one problem. The only thing that I see regulated is you're regulated as to the size of the dumpster you can put at the house when you have work going on it. So there's a lot of holes in the lease, and I think to do these, we'll have to make those leases more specific and more transparent and fair to both sides.
That's going to be at least a one winter project.
Well, I was approached by some of the residents standing there.
No, we went through this.
The end of last summer, and what happened is the elections came up, people went to Florida, and, some of those people will be back in maybe in June or that we could start talking about it.
I mean, all of this
I
came
think
up.
it's a great idea. Look forward to talking with the residents. Yeah, good stuff.
All right, let's move on to the next one. M. Batkin to place a camper on lot 19.
Yeah, I never even heard of that until I saw that on here.
Oh, really?
We have to look
Okay.
into this.
I've heard it.
Okay.
Chickens in an enclosed mesh.
Are they in the
fence.
There are no rules about chickens.
I was just going to say, I mean, now we have
can have-
chickens down there?
The
They
chickens
can
in the
have
camp
chickens.
have their own cesspool.
The camper is a different.
Well, I don't know how the neighbors are going
I
to feel
had-
about chickens.
Well, wait a minute.
the chickens
I had chickens for years. They're wonderful pets. As long as they take care of them, they get their fresh eggs. I mean, I have no problem with that. With regards to the camper, though, we may have to
I think there's
ask our council about that.
Can
Yeah,
I
this is-
tell you right
Wait a
now?
minute, what about
It's
the other half
contrary to
acre
the
that's
town
vacant?
code.
I think when you do that
That's
investigation
where
into
that
the
camper
town
goes.
regulations, you're going to be very surprised.
Oh, really?
It's weird.
I know, but
yeah.
it's in Lazy
Used to
Point.
be you had to get a
So we'll just
permit
put the
every year.
camper
I
down
don't
the
know
street.
how hard they've been working at it.
Renting any
But
lots.
I'm a lot more comfortable with the chickens than I am with the campers.
The chickens are going to live in the camper.
All right,
but
so
the
we'll
ca-
table
the
that one.
campers-
All right.
The campers could become very valuable, to some homes. Look at Ditch Plain.
Well, it's an expansion of the house.
Well, I'm serious about this. The half acre that's left because you're giving the half acre, what
Half
about the
lot.
camper?
These aren't very big lots. They're half lots.
Oh, so
They're
wouldn't
only,
we accommodate a half?
50 by 100
camper?
foot lots or 40 by 100
That's
foot
the lot
lots.
where they want to put it. I mean, the house is,
Yeah. The house is,
the house
no,
is
no.
already halfway across.
No, I know. That's why when they didn't want to, it's not halfway across. It's only
No,
about 4
but
feet.
it's,
In fact, it's not even that. I think that's the farthest. is-
well, the clearing for it.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at the town code on that with the campers. I don't know
All
anything
right.
about it. Obviously look into it. I guess one thing I can think of off the top of my head is the old can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Next thing you know, you have campers on every single piece
Right.
of property.
Right.
You got second families moving in
Right.
for the summer or whatnot, and I don't think that's the direction.
And what's the camper defined as? Is
could
it a
be-
pup tent or is it a Class A
I
mobile?
think
Airstream.
I think as soon as you say somebody's sleeping in it, I don't think you can put the toothpaste back in the tube because you just described
Yeah.
an expansion.
Stench, yeah.
Yeah, an
Yeah,
expansion.
use as a bedroom is what it says on it.
I think we need to look,
You just see
I
the
think we'll table
star.
that one. for-
Chicken stay, camper goes.
All right, legislation
Chicken sea, camper, no.
introduced by Assemblyman Engelbright and Senator Hannan to curb the use of water-soluble high-nitrogen fertilizers on Long Island. Letter of support requested, and
And it was done.
Susan put together a draft.
And it has your, yeah, everyone, I believe, has a copy. Lori made them for you.
We just need an approval for the board.
And
I'm
Francis
going to be honest, I'm going to be the devil's advocate. I really am deeply offended by these half-ass politicians that come up with these, you know, the whole nitrogen issue. It's not the nitrogen, it's the water, okay? We seem to be missing the point that the most precious.
But the fertilizers
This
don't
is
work
about
without the
lawn
water.
fertilizers.
They don't work without the water. So
Right.
if you took water out of the equation,
Irrigation system?
you could go out and dump that high nitrogen water-soluble fertilizer, which I'm going to tell you right now, there's very few lawn fertilizers today that are high nitrogen water soluble, okay? A lot of them are slow release. They're as slow release as, let's say, cow manure. But the thing that troubles me is the cow manure troubles me, is we've been peddling this story for years. Go organic, it's good for the environment. But the fact of the matter is, too much of anything is a bad thing. And the only way you can over-fertilize your lawn is if you have the ability to mitigate that with water. So if we could just please think about regulating water on the properties adjacent our waterways, we would go a long ways on controlling the problem. The thing that I have with this is, how do you can regulate the sale right now in Suffolk County. If you want to, from my store, I have to have signs describing when and where you fertilize. I hope the people that buy that fertilizer will use that information. But you know what's going to happen? People are still going to do what they've been doing. If they couldn't water it, if Suffolk Water Authority said tomorrow, hey guys, I just want to give you the data on how much water is being used for irrigation purposes on residential properties, it is staggering the amount of water that goes on there. Because if you take the average, I'm going to say the average irrigation system, typically if it's set up properly, it's set to put approximately 1 inch of water on your property a week. Now you can have weather controls that shut the system off when it's raining. They don't work very well on the coast. And you know what? Half the properties, people exceed the 1 inch. So naturally here we have about 41, 42 inches of natural rainfall a year. You run your irrigation system for about 30 weeks a year, so you just added 40 plus 30. Okay, you got about 70 inches of rain. And you got to ask yourself, where in the world do we get 70 inches of rainfall? It's not England, Ireland, that's about 48, 50 inches. It's freaking Cambodia, guys, okay? We're putting enough water on the property to grow rice, okay? It actually exceeds Louisiana in the continental United States, I think, has the highest rainfall. It's only 60 inches, okay? What we've done in the last 50 years is we've designed our lawns around irrigation systems, and what is going to have to happen is we can't, when we start to dial back the water, we're going to redesign the lawn, and we're going to go back in time to the native grasslands that were here. They're going to turn brown in the summertime, and they'll turn green in the fall, and everything will be fine. But I feel like supporting these half-assed bills that these politicians come up with, we're not going to get to addressing the problem.
I think this is a concerted effort. It is, as you say, because I went to the seminar several months ago down at Tom Toomey's library area, where all these lectures are held, and they had a woman from Stony Brook who's a doctor, and she's written books and pamphlets and presentation. Marvelous, very informative, how Suffolk County uses more water than any other area in the state of New York, and it's, I'm sure, due to irrigation systems. So we have to work on that, but we also shouldn't be putting chemicals into our groundwater through the soil. So this is a step in the right direction, and the other step is to turn off our irrigation systems.
You know what concerns me when we do this, Susan, is it's a little like the guy that gave to the Friends of Georgia. Okay, you just put your money in the collection plate. I've done my job. I'm absolved of all of my sins. Crank up the irrigation system, okay? And we're not addressing the problem, yet we continue to get down the road where we're throwing more water and more stuff on it. The quicker we can get to that point, the issue of the nitrogen
I'm certainly
is
much
moot.
more aware of what I'm putting on my lawn because I have a well. Most of us have a well. But I think not to send this letter in support is
I would actually, you know what I would ask? Is to not send that letter blindly supporting this, but add to it.
I was just going to suggest.
The language, add to it the language to please, why are you just looking at this? Why can't we look,
Understand they're artificially irrigating
why can't we be talking to the real problem, which is the water?
So let's do this. Why don't I call you, we will talk, and I will add on that section that you want to address as well. And then I will send it back out, and if everybody is happy with it,
The way it's written
Well,
here.
if you two guys work it out, do the rest of us have to see it?
Yeah, I don't know if we want to do that. It's not against our policy. Sending it out for approval of all board members. not-
well, I'm just trying to do, I want you all to be able to say yes or no to this letter, or if you agree that we can just do this.
Can it roll back into the
Have to reread it.
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why not.
I mean, you can get a copy of it, but we're just agreeing that it's going to go once we add this on.
All right.
It can also go
Okay,
after the
so
next meeting,
Jim,
John.
you and I will speak. I will work with you on this. We'll add that paragraph
Everybody
or
overlooks that artificial irrigation.
chapter in there.
It's the most
Okay.
important thing.
Can I tell you what, you know, Shelter Island, you cannot have an irrigation system on Shelter Island. In fact, if you
Do
have
you want to?
drip
Let's do it.
hoses,
May I
I'm
make a
serious,
motion to?
if you have drip hoses and you have them on a little timer on the side of your house, the building inspector will come up, they'll disconnect it, he will call you and say, if I come by there again and see that hooked up, I'm going to write you. And you know, we do projects on Shelter Island. We did one several years ago.
It's 9:15.
Okay.
Excuse me, Mr.
Let me
Grimes,
tell you,
question for
we
you.
lost less plant material. We lost less plant material in that job with no irrigation than we lose on properties with irrigation.
Jim, may I call you,
call me
and we will
anytime
finish
you
this
want.
letter, and
Yes.
we'll bring it back to the next meeting
Francis
before we
is
send
right.
it?
We got to move on.
Right?
If that's what you guys want to do. That's fine.
All right.
So we'll table it for 2 weeks.
All right, that's tabled. Old business, trustee policies and procedures for sand fencing, sure. Anything? No?
Did everybody get a chance? And I know all of you guys
Well, I
sat
thought
down
we were
in the
waiting,
toilet
for
and-
town attorneys.
and read that.
No, we were not. We
We're
gave it out
waiting.
to everybody to comment on.
Yeah, to
Oh, well.
comment on and to vote on tonight.
So we could table it.
Well, I've looked at this thing for how much, 18 months now?
Well, it's a little different. It's a little different.
Yeah, I know.
Chris polished it up. So we ready to vote on it?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we approve this.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're done.
We're done?
Well, this is done.
What that approval means is that I'm going to give John Nicky a call. We're going to present it to him and the supervisor. They're going to go through their process of reviewing it,
Okay.
hearing all that. I'll let you guys know. I think at some point we might need to be there. Jim, you mentioned you're up for that.
Yeah, I'm up for
as
that.
well. So with the approval, I think, is what you guys are saying.
Great. It'll be wonderful to see this thing finally move on.
Yes.
All right, committee reports, Accabonicog Creek, Lionhead Beach Association, Phragmites Control, and other non-native species on property.
And I'm here to say that Bruce Harwith is not here to address those issues at the moment. He is working on extra details, and so we will table this.
I think that's the same for Shapiro and
Yes.
Ewan as well.
Yes, all three of them. Yes.
They're all tabled until the next meeting.
Okay, ZBA hearing application of Rosenwald, 100 Runnymede.
I will be attending. It has been postponed to May 1st.
Okay.
I'll attend the ZBA meeting.
Do we have an issue with what they're doing?
Yes, this is the property where they want to take the house down. They will make it a little bit smaller, but they have some issues with replanting, vegetation. They also want to put in a pool house. I don't have the folder with me this evening. There's a pool in the front of the house. It's a total tear-down situation. The house is not currently a tear-down, but the former owner, you know this property because we've spoken about it before, where from the aerial view, the vegetation had been removed. There's more lawn now, and the vegetation has changed. If I'm not mistaken, it's a...
That's
No, this is the same for this one as well.
Yeah.
In front of me, yeah. They want 3 variances, and it looks as though the planning board has made some very good decisions.
Is the planning
proclamations.
board supporting this at this time?
No.
The planning board or the ZBA?
I mean, no, the
Well,
planning
that-
board and then the ZBA.
Yeah, it would be the planning board.
Well,
to make it-
excuse me.
DeAndrea? Is DeAndrea
Well,
planning?
Lisa's retired.
Lisa's
She's
not
coming
here.
in a couple days a week.
Okay. So that was her, I believe that that property was her case, and she has written, and I read the report, and the variances, it's really too much, in my opinion, and I will probably stand with that, those observations.
Okay.
Connolly, notice of completion for that bulkhead, Kings Point Road.
That was also the vegetation.
Yeah.
You had
The
commented on
bulkhead
that?
part's fine, and the vegetation's
Three of
got
us
nothing
went.
to do with us.
Right, but then Jim at the last meeting came up with,
Yeah, I don't know whether, this bill, I don't know whether you issue, a letter of completion. The bulkhead is been complete for a while, but one of the conditions of the bulkhead was I believe, the revegetation, and right now, as far as I know, they're in some sort of violation with the town.
Is that a condition of our permit?
Probably not.
Typically, at the top of the bulkhead and the revegetation is part of our permits. Okay, but this was additional revegetation, because this guy had a problem when the town reviewed this thing years ago.
So we're tabling?
I don't know.
and the agent was here last meeting, right, Susan?
Yeah, the bulkhead work
Woman
on
that we
this
met
and
at the house.
the both adjacent
Katie,
properties.
Katie, she was here at the last meeting to say that.
Yeah,
Okay, can I suggest that we review this permit and
let's
see
get the
what's
permit out.
required?
but, because
And then,
we're all in agreement that the bulkhead work is complete and fine. Okay? So if that's all the permit's for, we can have the secretary just review what the permit was actually for.
Okay.
If it doesn't mention vegetation,
She mentioned the vegetation when we went to the property. She said
Yeah.
when the summer,
No, they're
when the
having-
weather
they're
gets
having
warmer,
trouble
they
with
are
the-
going to revegetate.
they're
They
having
have a
trouble
plan.
with the town because
Yeah,
they,
it'd be nice to see that the vegetation work is done. So
Yeah, but if we don't, if it's not required on our permit that we already issued, we can't hold it up because of that.
Right.
So table to the next meeting and get the research on the permit. So Sue, can you check the permit?
I will check the permit.
Plantings, it just says on here, plantings shall be 12-inch on center and staggered rows.
That's on the permit?
That's on the
Yeah,
permit.
that'd be the beach grass, which I think is one of the things that was missing.
Okay.
In lieu of sod?
Well, no, they had
They
beach
put some
grass at one
fancy-
time, and then they ripped it
They're trying to
out.
do the lawn.
Again.
the
Yeah,
side.
well, it is lawn.
Yeah,
part
they're
of it.
trying to do the
Then a little
lawn
bit of
on a
beach grass.
45-degree angle, you know.
I think
But
they
that
extended
was the
the
problem
lawn,
on this one.
Yeah.
right? This is the property that
They
they
had
extended
put
the lawn.
beach grass in there.
Well, they had it. That was
Yeah,
the
I think
killer.
they
They
took it out and put
actually
sod in or
did
something
it.
like
They
that.
did it.
What is
They
the
did it,
term? I forget.
and the town signed off on it. But what happened is,
And then they turned around and undid it.
they never closed this permit out.
Right.
So they went,
Got caught.
okay, we're
All right.
good.
Okay.
Do you have Katie's information?
So that's how
Yes.
reading between the lines it's
Yeah.
gonna
I have her
work.
phone number
Okay.
on my phone.
Okay, I have it somewhere.
Because the only reason I knew about it is Frank called me on this one and said, hey, by the way,
Okay, so if that's the case, then we shouldn't close it.
Yeah.
Let's see where they're at.
Right.
Let them
What?
put the right kind of
On
grass
the
in there.
residents with the town in
Yeah.
building.
Here we are, Katie
Looking
S.
to do some other things.
Dewey.
that's usually how these things.
Okay, ZBA public hearing for Maslin for stone armor revetment at 307 Kings Point Road.
That is scheduled for tomorrow night, I believe. That hearing.
Okay. Has anybody reviewed it, and do we know where we stand on it?
Well, Maslin is the one where they're asking for, again, for the third time, I believe, for this stone armor revetment where they've been denied in the past.
Well-
And we've just
So-
we've given them permits for sand placement.
Okay, so there is no armament existing?
There is.
There
No,
is.
There's a
And they
revetment
want
that's
to,
legal.
they want to
That's been there
increase
for
that.
years.
They want to raise it and
They
put
wanna
another
raise it.
layer of revetment up top. And
So have they come to us for a permit?
Yeah, apparently,
Yes.
yeah.
So we have an application?
No, I don't think they know. I don't think
haven't applied. They haven't applied to us.
we haven't gotten
They
a
will.
permit from that
They will if they, if
Oh,
they're
at the hearing, at the
successful.
hearing.
This is at
after
the,
the public hearing.
Now, you know, to me, this is a conversation we should start having, because with sea level rise, we're going to be seeing a lot more of
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And you know what they're,
So we have
and can I tell you
to
what?
develop a policy.
It's-
You know
of
what
some
the
sort.
argument,
There's
you know what
still
the,
quite a bit
you
of
know what the
beach there.
argument is on this property, is that the revetment that they have in there is sound, it's doing its job.
It is.
Except what is happening is, when you get like a good heave on,
I mean,
the waves kick over the top of it and they're drawing the soil and material off the top. What's kind of a tough deal here is the town has said, we'll try the soft approach first. And if that doesn't work, come back to us. But you know, when you do something like that to somebody, trying the soft approach first, it's, you know, somebody's going to dump $15,000 or $20,000 to put something in that intuitively they may say, hey, you know, I don't know that this, I'm not confident that this is going to work. And, you know, if you were put in the same position, how would you feel that somebody's saying, I may entertain you raising that stone up, but first you gotta show me that you've wasted $20,000.
Well, that's why I think we
plant
need to
material.
discuss having a policy.
And, you know,
Well, maybe the
I
Beaches Committee should
understand,
go
I
to committee on
understand
this.
planning's position on this, but I struggle looking at these and looking somebody in the eye and supporting it because, you know,
Well, I'd say Beaches should committee this and do some research on it and come up with a recommendation.
well, I think the recommendation we may want to, this is up for hearing tomorrow night, I believe, isn't it?
So, you know, it's timely.
So You've got 12 hours.
Well, if an application is going to come before us, we'll have a little bit of time. to review it.
means we can't weigh in on it.
It's either the chicken or the camper. One or the other.
I have a funny feeling the application's going to get changed for the camper's going to become a chicken.
Yep, a chicken hut.
All right, well,
Well, is someone planning to attend the hearing tomorrow night?
well, what are we,
I have another meeting tomorrow night.
what are we going to add? I mean, we
You're gonna
haven't-
be there,
there's been
right,
no
Susan?
discussion on it.
if somebody on that committee, it would probably be worthwhile to hear the dialogue of that meeting to get a sense of.
It'll be televised.
I'll have to watch on TV.
You get the
I
tape.
have ambulance meeting tomorrow.
Well, I'm happy to go. 6:30? Is it?
The hearing is
There's a
scheduled at
time.
7:50.
7:50? Okay.
So you
I will
really
attend.
literally, you only have 11 hours.
Could I exchange with you then anything that
Can we
you
get
have
a
extra?
copy of the tape?
So I can read it?
No, Francis.
Thank you.
Can we get a copy
I'll
of
go
the tape? for us?
tomorrow night.
Go on demand.
I don't know.
You watch it on demand.
Shouldn't mean-
Ask Mr. Chapman.
Yeah, everything that I pulled out of
Ask
the
it open
file,
microphone?
trustee office.
No, I'm sure we can get a
Could
copy
I
of the
take it
tape.
with
I'm
me?
sure we
trustee,
can.
Read it overnight, and then I'll return it to you? As long as you've already put it together, I'll
It's
get back to you.
the TEC determination that they denied them as well, back in 2016. They recommended the soft approach to sand placement as well.
Okay.
All right. Aquaculture. Acabonic Harbor mosquito larvae survey. Possible purchase of additional GPS devices.
I just have 3 of these, so
Thank you.
these are the devices that Nature Conservancy, Vector Control recommend. They're $300.
And this is the ones that just, the only difference is they have a Bluetooth connection to
Yeah,
it.
you can send the data right.
I think so.
Yeah, I think, from a field perspective, the timeliness of reporting is really important. I don't know that we'll be able to be successful with an ad hoc reporting
Jerry-rigged.
system in this case because of the timeliness of reporting that's required.
Somebody want to make a motion to purchase?
Well, how many do we want?
3 of them.
3.
What, 3?
3?
How much are they a piece?
There's 3
$300.
teams.
$300.
So I'd like to make a motion that we get these and get this project going. There's a
I'll
lot of
second- I'll
interest
second it.
in this project, so I think it's worth the investment.
I-
And we use the Montanas for the horseshoe crabs and other
I
projects.
would like to make a note that it says April 30th, they're on back order, you wrote.
Oh.
Yeah, that should
It's
be
only
all right.
next week.
Okay,
Should be all
I
right.
know, but we need to get up and running soon.
Yeah, because they're sampling now. I
There's
saw
no,
the guys
there's
out.
no other availability anywhere else.
Okay.
All right, sounds good to me.
I'm just still not clear on why it has to be any faster than getting the information, going back and logging onto a computer and transferring the data.
Because it wasn't that easy. The GPS we have didn't fit the format that they use, so it had to be translated.
Okay, so
before it
it's
could-
not a Bluetooth to be able to send the data from the field.
Yeah, it is.
In part it is,
In part, yeah, it's not.
but it's
the-
also in the right format, so it's a one-step process versus docking it, downloading it to the computer, bringing it into a spreadsheet, formatting the data, so someone
Got
who's
it.
kind of techie.
Gotcha.
Then emailing it to someone.
Yeah.
All these steps, I think the process is probably going to
But
fall.
the time frame is we were going to get them the data Monday morning.
Well, I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure it was,
Yeah. Something
it made
reasonable.
sense, yeah, and it does.
The 2
I
units we
understand.
have will not lose their usefulness as far as,
This also requires either an iPad.
Well,
or
can't
an
these be
iPhone
used
to
for what? For
transmit
the other
data.
stuff too? They're on.
Everybody's got a phone.
Right, well, we have the other ones too, so I'm just
We
saying.
can eBay them.
And there'll be no,
we
there'll be
keep
no
them, right?
problems with
Well,
signal,
if they're busy with
Shouldn't
these, they want to do
no matter,
something.
because of locations.
yeah, it's open, it's all open marsh. Usually you have trouble with signals, it's trees and stuff.
Yeah.
So we have a motion
Okay.
on the floor.
Second.
It was seconded.
From Rick?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Just one other thing about
Did
this
everyone vote?
program.
Yeah.
Susan and I have gone over this list of participants, potential participants. We have about 10 or 12 potential. We're going to choose about 5.
We have
out of
13.
13, we're going to choose 5.
You guys are doing a great job.
Yeah,
I-
Thank you.
Sorry I can't get involved.
But a little wrinkles come up in that we have to get the actual sampling schedule from TNC or Vector Control or a combination of those two before we finalize this list. Because it turns out it was suggested that we were going to do 4 samplings in June, 4 samplings in July, and 2 samplings in August. But it turns out there's actually 5 Mondays in July. So we asked the question, okay, so how does that affect the 4, 4, and 2? And it sounds like they haven't really worked out what the exact schedule is going to be. So that they're aware of that. We haven't heard yet. So when we get that schedule, at that point we'll.
Who'd you ask? Vector?
I talked to Vector. I talked to the Nature Conservancy.
Okay.
The thing is, everyone was told originally, we were all told that it was Mondays, 7 a.m. meeting in Accabonac Harbor, so that's how the information was disseminated to volunteer groups that I contacted. And now, if this has changed, because it's about the moon, right?
Well, we're not
Full
sure
moon.
it's changed.
I mean,
But Vector does work around the moon also.
Yeah.
So
The
they
moons
like
are
to sample
extra.
1 or 2 days after the moon.
I think
And that doesn't always work out to be
So
a
you guys are
Monday.
going to follow up to get the exact schedule?
Yes.
We'll have to
Yes.
wait to see
And we
what
have
the
to have the
exact
water-
schedule is going to be.
Did you send this to everybody, or does everybody want this?
I just have one thing to say,
Good.
the education of the scholarship.
Scheduling?
Thanks.
No, I just sent that to you and Susan.
You guys want
So until we have a more definitive schedule.
We'll do that right after.
We are going to hold off and
I'm going to
contact people,
confuse
but
it.
John and I
days
met
they're
to
gonna-
discuss the various people who were interested in the program. And, we just want consistency.
Yeah,
We
I'll
have to
send
have
it
people
to
that will
Well, I
do the
guess
whole course.
get the dates, I think is the key.
So,
I mean, is the program in jeopardy of not going off?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
It's just that we didn't want to, as Susan said, we didn't want to
Pick the wrong candidate.
pick these people when their understanding is, Monday.
A certain schedule.
If it's going to change, we
right.
didn't
They
want to.
can't plug in.
We've honed in
It
on,
might alter the
list.
which 5 of the 13 can
Understood.
do that.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thanks, John.
Oyster Pond, oyster transfer?
I'm still waiting for Tom Dest to get back to me. He was out of the state, and he was going to check on this Saturday, but I tried to contact him again today, haven't heard back from him.
Okay.
And just one other thing about that, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but if we find oysters and we apply for the transplant permit, it's very likely we'll have to do some water testing first. DEC requires, when they do a transplant takes place, they require water quality testing data from the body that the oysters are taken from and the body of water the oysters are going to. And there hasn't been water quality testing in Oyster Pond for some time.
I did one about 2 or 3 years ago, talking about this, but, I think you need 3, but they're rainfall related, I believe.
Yeah, that may take a little while, but we can do this transplant into the summer, so it's really not,
Okay.
it's not a problem.
All right. Horseshoe crabs?
Did you want me to check with Lisa, or did you nail it down?
Wade I'm in touch with Wade. He's
Okay.
checking with Lisa.
Horseshoe crabs?
We had a nice meeting with Matt Swafani. Okay, and what we're going to try and do is take on Napeag and Northwest as a pilot this year. There is a, when is it, John? May 2nd?
May 2nd?
There is a sort of training day. I'm going to try and attend it.
Yeah, if we can get a couple members to attend, I was thinking about that, in that not everyone who's a volunteer or even a trustee that's going to participate can attend this training, because it's midweek during the working day. But if we could get a couple of people who are maybe deputized as trainers, and they can come back to East Hampton, and when we do our kickoff meeting at the next harbor management meeting, which I think could be May 9th, right before the new moon of May, then those people that were trained could hand out the collection bags, the tags, and educate everyone. The other thought I had was to try and have Matt come out and do an East Hampton training and kick this program off, which would be great, if we had 6 or 8 or 10 people.
Where do they have the training?
Where,
John?
yeah, where
It's
and
up
when
in-
is this training
It's
going
up
to
at the
It's at
DEC office
DEC
in
in
Stony Brook.
Setauket,
Setauket.
May 2nd, 10 o'clock.
So it's a full-day commitment to participate. So those are just a couple of thoughts.
I think one thing we need to decide on, though, is exactly how many sites we're going to do. Because that might, if somebody goes to this session and gets the materials, we're going to have to know how much we need.
Right.
Kind of thing, how many people we're going to need, volunteer-wise.
So I put together, a basic tide chart with the dates of the new moon and the full moon for Northwest Harbor and for Napeague Harbor. On Northwest Harbor, Tom and I have spoken about 2 potential monitoring sites. One at the end of Mile Hill Road, which has good access and parking, and one on the interior of Northwest Creek at Stratton's Beach, where you could go around the whole peninsula. So we have 2 sites, I think, pretty well in mind for Northwest Harbor. And I don't know if anyone's given any thought to Napeague. So we could test, in Northwest, we could test either 1 or 2 sites.
Did you guys talk to the county in yet?
Have not. So, John, I can delineate that on the map for you. I saw that in Matt's email. So, if you're planning to go up to the training.
Think we'll need to talk to the county to do it?
It wouldn't be a bad idea to run it by them.
We can chat. I mean, that's, open. People walk there, hike there, fish there, clam there all the time, so.
But they have in the past, like, put fences and stuff up.
Just let them know what's.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other property is all, Trustee Beach, up to the north.
These will be done in the evening, right?
Well, there is an opportunity to
Nighttime?
do a daytime and a nighttime. So there's 2 high tides, so one is during the day. And I have seen horseshoe crab activity during the day, not as much, but I have seen it, so it does exist.
So in the evening, if I'm going to do this, do I go by myself at night?
That'll be part of the
I
training,
think
but
there
it should
should
be at least 2 people. You
Yeah.
have to have a team at night and during the day.
I'm not sure I can make this training on the 2nd.
I'll be making it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So at least having one kind of group leader from each location attending the training would be very helpful.
And I hope to be at Napeague.
And somebody that can,
You want to carpool up there?
Wednesday,
I would like to go as well.
that would be great, because then if you could be on the Northwest.
Yes, I'm
committee.
Northwest, that's where I go anyway. I would love to do Northwest, so I'll
I'll
go.
contact Frank Cavedo from SOFO, and
Right.
he
said
agreed to, provide volunteers.
No,
He
everyone I
may
speak to
be
is
interested in being a coordinator. But Brian Frank actually expressed interest in doing this.
Right.
He's been a coordinator in the past, so.
Yeah, if we get someone that could actually do the training out here, I think it would really
Wednesday.
increase the participation.
Oh, yeah.
If you can.
When is that training up there?
Yeah,
May
it's a
2nd,
It's a
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
10
It's
o'clock.
all coming fast.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got May 14th there.
Yep, May 14th is the day before the May new moon. So I put down the day before the new moon, and the day after.
It's the training.
And then we did 2 days before the full moon, and the day after. As the full moon probably is a little later, a little warmer, maybe a little more powerful.
All right, let's move on to education.
I'm up.
Batter up.
And if it's not like.
Everybody ready?
Yes.
Our annual Rysam Scholarship will take place May 11th at the trustee's office. This is a $500 scholarship, only one winner. All trustees are encouraged to come down. It's really not a committee thing. Everybody come and look at the applications and vote.
Has this been sent to the high school yet?
Watch this. Go
Okay.
ahead. No, that I don't know. Wait.
I picked up the application.
Up.
There we are.
I picked up the applications.
What did you need to know?
If it's gone out yet. So
The application?
You picked up the
The cutoff is come and gone. Is that what you mean?
Doesn't this go through the school? The applications are at the school, and
And I picked them up, and then I brought them to the trustee's
so
office.
that's,
and
okay,
from
that's
there,
what I'm
I think
asking.
it's-
That's all been done?
Completed.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Cool.
they've already submitted. They're
Yep.
there for us to review, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
How many were there? Do you recall? roughly?
Oh, I'm sorry.
How many
I
applicants?
did not open up the envelope. I thought it was secret.
Well,
kidding when I said
yeah, they're not ready, but they're not ready yet.
It was a nice pile.
Right, so
I
now
didn't
we
feel I
need-
should open
so
it up.
now
Yeah.
the trustees should then look at them, review them.
I think last year
and
there was 5.
Identify which one you think is the appropriate choice.
Yep,
And when is the deadline for the?
May 11th. We're
May-
gonna,
May 11th.
we'll
Will
pick.
you be emailing us, to let us know about this event? That we should come down to the office?
I don't think we have to come down.
Between now and then, everyone has to go and pick.
We should require each of these
Yes,
kids to
okay.
volunteer.
There you go.
There you talk.
And there's no
Photograph of them
update
saving
on
a
John
horse
Marshall?
trap.
Yes, there is.
Yes, go ahead.
No, please.
I can't.
Oh, that.
I don't know anything about it.
All
So
right.
you go.
Well, I'm still working on getting some dates. I was told by the principal that she had various different things going on with the teachers, and after April 17th, so I gave her a few days, and I wrote again and called, and I will let you know as soon as we have a date. And John Barley Dunn will be accompanying us as well. Hopefully, it will be on a date that suits him. So we're working on it. I will be doing a little artwork for my end of the education on balloons and fish and marines. I picked up all the balloon remnants from the Easter Bunny hunt. And I'm going to make a little artwork.
Okay. Georgica Ponds, Rivkin, 3 Eel Cove.
Did that already?
We did that. We did Schultz, 1 Eel Cove.
No, we didn't.
That's a separate project, and Bruce pointed that out to us today, and I think he's still working on his DEC, and he's in no great rush, so we can table that until our next meeting.
Okay, and Georgica Association, Phragmites.
Same thing.
Okay, great.
It's going to be a nice improvement to that whole corner of the pond.
All right, Harbor Management Report?
Yeah, we covered the horseshoe crab under aquaculture, so that was really the current event. I have been doing a little bit of paddling now that the weather's getting warmer. There are still a few duck blinds in the water. There was one that was clearly pretty active this year in Northwest that's still in. And there's a legacy derelict that's still in the water. We didn't get out last year. I didn't take it out because it could be a nice spot for a kind of a community blind or a Boy Scout blind. It's in a nice spot. So, Jim, I'd like to talk to you about that a little further maybe for
Hoping
next
we
year.
could do 2.
This is a good one in
lines,
Northwest.
Get some youth groups involved to build them, and maybe they would get the use of them next year.
This one's a potential update.
And then, we can store them at our office, over Bluff Road.
Yep.
And then maybe the following year, we can do a lottery where people could get the use of the blinds for a week.
We have more part-time.
At a time, because actually at the Sportsman's Show on Saturday, which thanks for everybody that could make it to that, we didn't have very many people wanted to talk to the trustees, but the few people that did, it was about duck blinds and how can I go about getting a spot for a duck blind? So it was sort of fit.
Okay, so we'll see if we can.
And many
ensure
thanks
that
to Joe Blocker for being there.
Yep.
He was terrific.
And the clam.
Yes, thank
Taught
you,
me
Joe.
how to open up a little clam.
Did all the clams
Disappear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, they did,
Oh,
finally?
yes.
Okay.
All gone.
I'd like to make a motion to maybe just send Joe a letter of thanks.
I second that. All in favor?
Yeah, and also, we need to pay him.
What's that?
We need to pay him
For
that service.
he, I think he donated his time.
That's awfully nice of him, but it's not necessary. We pay Shibo when he does it.
Okay, but you know what? I think I'll talk to Joe, but
All
I
right.
thought that was a generous gift from him.
Okay.
Brought his own opening table
I know.
and stuff. It was a nice
We
setup.
give him $100.
So we made a motion, we'll sort of send him a letter, though?
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
approved, okay.
All right, roads, crooked highway inspection report?
Well, we've been doing a lot of field work, and Susan's been doing a lot of research here at the town hall and around. And we have identified a handful of properties that have some encroachments and may have missing easements that are going to require a deeper look by council. So I want to thank Susan for all her hard research, and she may want to add a couple of words to this discussion. But it looks like there's a lot of work to be done as we continue researching the roads. And there will be the need for, I think, repairing some easements and addressing some further encroachments.
Yeah, I agree. We I've done a lot of research. I'm pulling out a lot of old files and within our records and planning boards, and there are some questionable things we're not sure of if there are easements, because there was old subdivision waivers that were done back in the 80s. So some of that I'm going to turn over to Chris, and he can research it further. And we just like to make sure that these properties are compliant with our regulations and with the town regulations, and that everybody's, within their meets and bounds and not encroaching on any of our properties. And I'm thankful for having people like Mr. Richardson tonight from CFAR, addressing the board with concerns that he sees, because that's not something that I would see. I spent much time when I was a child on Hicks Island with my father, because he kept his barge and everything right there. And I know when I was a child, there was that, we called it Seagull Island, because it was just full of wildlife. And to hear that that's not the case now is sad, and that somebody has posted these signs. Public access is a real important thing for us, and we need to keep on top of it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm optimistic we will see some birds starting to nest there. I think she might have been there. It was still pretty cold. Might have been a little early for that site. So I'm hoping to get with him to go over there and take a look.
What was kind of nice
the signs and stuff really need to be looked at too.
is if that's an argument for keeping 2 inlets open.
Yeah, it could be.
That's something that could
Or a
support.
seasonal opening like the culvert, which ties into the nesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we definitely own Hicks Island?
But you know what? There are no roads on Hicks Island.
You own Hicks?
We own, well, definitely where the former cut was. That's delineated correctly.
I don't know.
These signs
There's
are
some
obviously
weird-
privately
And
made.
You'd want to look into it.
What about Hicks Island
So-
itself?
Not the upland. I don't believe so, but we can check further.
Anything
Well,
between-
I guess what I'm
anything
saying
between-
is the eastern shore of Napeag, my understanding that's state. That's the whole thing with the beach driving permits and who's.
Yeah,
Yeah, that whole.
I didn't want to
I
start
thought
that.
that
discussion.
extended
I
onto
thought that
Hicks
quite
Island.
either,
I
but
don't
there's a
know.
lot of,
Let's
there's
talk
a
about
lot
that
of
further.
history
Yeah.
there.
Maybe we should committee that discussion.
We dug
and come
that
back.
I think the ownership has to be
$60,000 trench there one year.
investigated there.
Well,
But
up to
state
the,
claims
certainly on
it's
the
their
inside of the harbor, up to the high tide mark,
The
would
doctrine,
clearly be
the
trustees.
public use doctrine goes, gives the state the
To the
right
high
to,
tide mark.
from the rack line
But maybe not the rest of the beach.
to low water.
Put those signs here.
That's correct. That's
We
correct.
Low water is fine.
So before we move on, I'll chip in quickly on the easements and the roads committee. So
Yes.
first, roads committee, I apologize, I couldn't make the meeting today. I have done a lot of kind of research and some background work and several meetings with John Courtney and Rick Whalen. We've really kind of tackled some of this stuff. So just to tell the trustees what I've gotten out of this thus far. Historically, the trustees have required that the homeowners pay for and the easement and the quitclaim deed back to the trustees. It has become a more and more of an expensive endeavor for any homeowner, because what you need in order to draft the easement is a meets and bounds survey. There's not as many of those around anymore, because you need that language in there to depict exactly where that's going to be. So the leverage we had there was that we were able to require them that they go ahead and get the survey and draft the easement and the deed prior to issuance of any town permitting. So again, what we're going back to is that need for us to address all the permitting agencies with letter, which we've talked about for the last 4 weeks, so that's on me to do. But the point I'm also making here is that it's going to be very difficult for us going forward to have any leverage to require these homeowners to go ahead and draft an easement, pay for this $2,000-3,000 survey. We do have a draft trustee form easement that we use, which is very helpful. But we'll have to sit down with the roads committee and really look at the value, especially at some of these properties like the Cranberry Hole Road one, where really that most of that property appears to be, in control by the town, and we'll look at that in committee. But where that really cool kind of road starts, where we can actually use it, the trail and the value to the trustees is really might be beyond that Cranberry Hole property. And we might want to decide that to try to, in hindsight, send this letter to these guys and make them get the easement. It might not be worth the time and the money and resources commitment to the trustees. But again, I'm sorry I didn't make the meeting. We can talk about that in committee. But basically what I'm saying is the easement stuff is expensive, and we really need to get to the town so that we can have some leverage in requesting.
So, Chris, what's a timetable for you to draft a letter that the committee could review as a starting point?
Yeah, that's going to be this week now.
Okay. And then the bigger discussion on the easements and the cost and everything like that, it is trustee property that we're talking about, so I think there is an interest in taking maybe a little harder look at that before we let go of it.
Sure.
So, if we could coordinate a date to maybe meet at the committee level with the letter and a preparation to have that discussion on easements.
Yep.
So we can, as a group, get back to the
That's
board.
with other departments. That's what
The letter is to
for
the
the
other
departments.
departments, but the
Okay.
discussion of easements really is for us to come up with a recommendation to the board.
Well, I think
as
we
to how to
also
proceed.
need to discuss, and not necessarily now, but for the folks that have already violated or have encroached, that how we move forward to correct these issues should financially be a burden to them and not us, since they're the ones that are encroaching. I mean, that's something we need to discuss as well.
Right, in addition to the easements.
Yeah.
So in easements, encroachments, and communication with other agencies.
Absolutely.
So those are the big three.
And maybe even annual, people that do get easements to make possibly annual fees for being able to use trustee roads to...
Well, on an easement, typically an easement's a one-shot deal,
Okay.
so.
Did we not discuss that?
There was some language in some documents that I
Some of them.
found years past where the trustees discussed a yearly fee for use
Associated
of
with
that
the easement.
easement. But most, all easements that I did come across, there was a one-time fee of $10 that was paid.
Right, but nowadays, when folks are coming and taking advantage of us having these public roads and then going in and build multi-million-dollar houses, and then they can sell and make these profits on, using our road, we should get more than $10 or a fee for an application. That's my opinion, but
I agree.
I think times have changed, so
Well,
we ought to...
typically, application fees, there's some state guidelines on that, in that issue. You can't use fees, like a building permit, let's say. You can't use fees like that to raise money. That fee should only represent the cost to adjudicate that permit.
Oh, yeah, not mix, I did mix the two up, I didn't mean to, but that would be two separate fees.
Okay,
Let's get a date together, Chris.
Yeah, let's meet soon. Again, I'm sorry I couldn't make it tonight, but
Okay,
I'll
and-
give some more information to add to that conversation.
How about I give you a call tomorrow, and we'll set a date, and I'll confer with Susan and Dell, and we'll all get together?
We have to figure out how we're going to have some leverage to require these certain properties that have already been CO'd to get them into compliance, because to go there and say, hey, you guys mind doing a new survey? They're gonna they might laugh at us. So we gotta figure out how to do that. And we'll rack our brains and we'll get together and do it.
Okay.
Very good.
All right. At the Sportsman's Alliance, I was approached by somebody who was asking about the road at the Art Barge.
Yeah, so was I.
I'm
I have
working on
pictures of
that.
it.
Susan's been working on that.
I'm actually
so
going
if
to
you could
Suffolk
report.
County tomorrow.
But you had found out some information about
I
it.
do, with me. I have their deeds to the two properties, I have surveys, but there is an agreement, because most of that property was owned beforehand by the Smith Meal Company and Alice Titan, I think. Anyway, before it was also sold to the state. But there is wording in one of the deeds about an agreement made in 1962, which we didn't have a copy of, and the planning department pulled out their files, they didn't have a copy of that either. So I wanted to go and get my copy of that. It's filed with Suffolk County. I'm going to go get a copy of that, see how that reads, and then approach the issue where, understanding that a gentleman from the art barge put that chain up with those signs.
So the art barge has an easement with the state, is what it sounds
The
like.
art barge, Smith Meal Company, and the neighboring
Smith
property
Meal
owner.
Company no longer exists.
I understand that,
Right.
but it was to these three parties and their assigns.
And their signs.
Right.
Which is now New York State. So
Right,
there-
which they were
there
granted
could-
an easement for that dirt road.
So there
But
could
the-
be legitimate public access via
Right,
the
no, I
state
understand
property.
that, but the belief is that it's a trustee road, but
No.
it's not a trustee road.
It's not a trustee
Right.
road, but it goes to trustee property.
It's access to
It's access.
Traditional access.
Right,
Traditional
right,
access
no, I
to a
understand that.
trustee
I just
beach.
wanted to,
And that
I don't want
it's-
to, if he asks me again, I don't want to give him false information.
Right.
Because he
And they
thought-
don't, right, they
thought it
don't
was trustee
own that road. You know, the
Right.
homeowners, the property owners, those two property owners down there, the art barge and
Right.
forget the name of the
We
other.
believe there's an agreement for public access through the road that they have an easement on.
Right.
And we need to clear that up.
Right.
Okay, great.
Which hopefully I'll get a hold of this document tomorrow and then we'll see what we have.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
3 Mile Harbor, Duke, we spoke about.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to administrative payment of the bills. East Hampton Star, $237.10 for public notices. North Fork Water Supply, $43.97. Anthony Towhill, $183.75 for Deepwater Wind. Staples, $20.30. Riverhead Building Supply, $358.92 for lumber to repair the Settlers Landing kayak racks. No, it's for the other one. It was for Louse Point.
No, I did Louse Point.
Oh, you did Louse
You
Point?
didn't get a bill for Louse Point.
You got Settlers Landing. We're going to get a bill, I would hope.
I was going to give it to you.
All right. And Diane Signs, $1,349 for mooring stickers. Do I have a motion?
Second? Motion to pay the bills?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes, March 26th. Has anybody had a chance to review them?
March 26th,
Yep.
I did.
Yeah, you had it.
I did.
Yeah, I believe that
And-
Susan and John had some amendments, and Susan
And
Vorpal,
Susan
did you
Vorpal,
have?
all three of
a
us.
couple?
I had amendments to the April 9th,
April 9th,
which I
so you
gave.
Yeah, you gave me some.
So I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of March 26th.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, April 9th.
I also looked those over and submitted my,
Susan, yours were
Comments?
submitted as well?
I submitted mine to Arlene last week.
so I'll make a motion.
Susan reviewed.
Good. Good. Nice to be on top of them.
Yep.
Do you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the April 9th minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, financial reports for the month ended March 31st.
I had an opportunity to review them, and we,
Wait a minute. Yeah, okay.
yeah, and we purposely, held them back just to give folks an opportunity to look at them. I was okay with them. The only one thing I just wanted to bring up from time to time is how and when we plan to fund the RISM. I know, Jimmy, you had mentioned, I was just looking at those numbers, and that we'll be giving $500 to the scholarship.
Well,
We talked about putting, using some of the money from sand sales.
yeah, I don't know whether, I mean, the simplest thing that probably would be affordable, the rice and scholarship is $500 a year. So if we put $1,000 a year into it, would be at least be growing the principal. And I think as a minimal thing, we should be doing something like that. So, we're not eroding that principal anymore, and we're actually going to be building it. Yeah, that's, with the interest rates where they're at right now, you're not going to get a whole heck of a lot out of that, but at least
Positive flow.
It's positive flow.
Can we put that in a form of a motion?
Well, I don't see why we have to wait to sell sand. I mean, we're constantly putting money in these CDs. Why can't we put $1,000 towards the
Well,
rice?
that's why I was going to suggest that, because what happens is, on the selling sand thing, we're tabling this down the road.
Right.
And I think if we have a windfall, that we could supplement or do more. I'll make a motion that we place at least $1,000 a year out of our general fund into the rice and fund.
Should we pick a date for that to happen?
We can.
May 1st?
There you go.
April
May Day.
15th, what the hell?
How about May 5th?
Wasn't there discussion
Cinco de
also about
Mayo.
the clam contest? Taking some of that?
Has nothing to do with the rice and
We don't make money on the clam contest. We spend money.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do we have a date, May 5th?
How about 7/1, halfway through the year, we've gotten some permit revenues in, et cetera.
All right.
Yeah, it's just-
7/1?
it's just prior
Okay.
to the scholarship being awarded, so.
July.
So we have Jimmy's motion with a set July 1st annual minimum, funding date.
And I second that.
Yeah, at least, because we might want to put more into it.
I like that.
Well, that's the reason I say, this way, there's the latitude if, like I said, if we have a windfall that we're looking for places to put money, we can.
Put half a kayak fees or something.
Well, listen, we got those, by the way, you are aware, Arlene, that there's 8 more slots on Louse Point Road now.
Thank you, yes, we're very
Okay.
grateful for
One little piece of that.
We need a vote on this? We have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. So that out of the way, without any further discussion, I would move that we accept the balance sheet for March 31st, 18, or March 31st, 17 through March 31st, 18.
Is that a motion?
Second?
Yep. Make a motion that we accept it.
We have a second?
Second it.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Appreciate you taking the time to look at them.
And we have the renewal of a certificate of deposit ended in account 0232.
I'd like to make a motion to roll it over.
Second.
All in favor? Great. All right, report of the clerk. We need to decide on the largest clam contest. Let's see. John Aldridge was going to check the tides. It looks
Well, we
like
did. I did
September
with Lori.
23rd.
Did
Right?
Lori pass the date on?
I have it here, John. Okay, it appears September 23rd would be a good date. Now, the only other things going on then that we're aware of is the Greenport Festival, which shouldn't affect us.
For the clams?
Yep.
How about the Seafood Festival in Montauk?
The
When's that
Seafood
going?
Festival in
It's around.
Montauk is 10/8 and 10/9.
Perfect.
And Sag Harbor Fest is 9/8, 9/9, so.
That's a good,
That's a great date then.
10, 8, and 10, 9.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Our second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I want to talk about mass assembly permits. What happens now is I attend a meeting with a committee that's made up of the police chief, fire chief, town clerk, 2 town board members, Parks Department. All these applications come in from mass gatherings, and we vet them. We decide on whether they're okay or not. We check the beaches. They keep track of which beaches are not having multiple parties so that they don't get overwhelmed. And then for the beaches, they get the permit there with the town, and then we make them come to the trustees to get a duplicate of the same permit. I'm wondering if you guys would be okay if we stop issuing that permit, since it's already being vetted there, and it's with the attendance of the clerk, and not make these people jump through hoops, for a duplicate.
Is there a permit fee associated with it?
No. We don't charge a fee. It's administrated by us at our cost.
And these are permits for beach?
If you want to have a party on the beach with 30 people, you're supposed to come and get a permit.
Was it
for that.
over 50 people?
50 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
And commercials, okay, there are commercial caterers. They all, no matter how many people, they need to get the permit.
What's the vote like? Does any one person have veto power?
Veto power?
Well, I mean, does it have to be unanimous among this committee?
No, but they when it comes to the beaches, they look to the trustee for their opinion on it. And the town clerk's office is keeping track of where these parties are so that we're not overwhelming certain beaches.
Excuse me.
It's all good. The problem, I agree, you shouldn't have to go through all that stuff. However, the one thing that the town or the Parks and Rec isn't doing is inspecting the beach after these parties. And I think somebody should be more.
But neither are we.
I'm sorry?
But neither are we.
Are we what?
We're not going to inspect after the party either.
We are now.
Okay. So, but why does coming here change that?
No, it shouldn't.
Right.
It shouldn't.
I'd be more than happy if you wanted that job. I'll tell you which parties are where and when.
I would love that.
Can you think of any?
Francis,
and then I agree.
The only thing, my only concern, I think that's fine, my only concern would be that we just lose the communication that these events are going on the beach, and for Dell's purpose is, hey, if you don't know that there's a party there, you don't even know whether you're going to go inspect it. And as long as we can definitively be informed that this stuff's going on our beaches, and that it isn't like a ZBA issue or something where the notification of the trustees kind of falls
Not like I said,
between the
the
cracks.
trustees are part of the committee that approves all the permits. And can I just say one more thing? Can you give us a list of what's required for that permit from these applicants?
From the town?
No, what we require from the applicants.
Well, we still get our certificate of liability.
We make them get a certificate of liability.
But they have to get papers
bring in.
notarized, and often,
They jump through hoops for something they already did.
I understand what you're saying. I'd like to make it easier, but I don't know that I'm ready to just say, we're going to just walk away from it. You know, I could see if, bring the town permit in, and you get your trustee permit. I just feel that we should have.
I think that's a very good idea, where it's consolidated.
A simpler way where the trustees are still involved in the process. I just feel like we're just giving up oversight.
But how are they not involved in the process if they're a part of the committee?
Because there isn't a trustee process that issues a permit for the event. There isn't a record in the trustee office of all of the events that are taking place. It's an outsource. And from my personal research with the roads committee, it seems like the trustees have become an adjunct to certain process. And it's not easy to go back and kind of, like to Chris's point earlier, this is going to be a heavy lift to get some of these things straightened out.
Let me ask this.
And I think there's a way to make it simpler without just giving up participation.
What is the board adding to the process now? Nothing. Because I go to the meeting, I see the parties, I say yes or no. They come back to us again, they give them the paperwork, and then, so I just don't understand.
I would just like to have a little time to think about it, Francis.
That's fine. I'm not asking you to vote tonight. I want to start the conversation.
Let me ask you this. Is it possible that, I think to Rick's statement, rather than relinquish the trustees' visibility in the process, if they go to the town for the application and they fulfill all of the requirements through the town, and the trustees are named on that permit as being part of the process. So they don't have to do duplicate paperwork, but that the trustees then are given the paperwork, we have this information on file, we are noted as part of the permit process, but it's only one set of documents rather than having, it's a frustrating
Yeah, because they're
situation.
coming up here to the town clerk, then they're coming to Amagansett for the same party, and...
But I
and
think
they're-
it can be a unified,
That's all I'm asking to happen.
Where we have files, though, where we are actually
listed.
listed.
An improvement's necessary, definitely.
Yeah, a streamlined situation, but we are recognized as being part of the process
Mm-hmm.
in that application that they are given.
What is the requirement on these beach permits, mass gathering permits for cleanup after the party?
I'll tell you what I'll do is the next meeting, I'll bring in all the paperwork that's required through the town clerk's office.
Perfect.
And you can all look at that.
That's good.
Can you think
Because
of,
there are requirements.
can you think of any instance
And when those
where the-
requirements aren't met, what's the recourse?
Fines.
Yeah.
No, you keep their deposit.
can you think of
Well,
any
some of them have
situation where
deposits.
Let's look at the
the
plans
town might
in the applications.
want to give out a
Depending
permit
on
and
the
the
number
trustees
of
don't?
people who attend them.
I'm not
There
sure.
could be.
Yeah, but there is a deposit.
Previous violators?
You get somebody,
Red flaggers.
somebody that left a big pile of crap on the beach.
And we've caught...
Film crew has breached the agreement and has been fined several times for littering at Atlantic Beach. If they were to come back around and apply it again, I think there would be a little bit more consideration or understanding made that this isn't going to happen, what happened last time.
Well, just...
Is there a way we can generally approve these things and still maintain the,
I think we can figure it out.
authority to...
I mean, right now, we have a voice in every single party that happens in East Hampton. I mean, the music festival. We have a voice in the music festival. I mean, so it's, it's a trade-off, really.
Okay.
Well,
Let's
the
take a look
permit
at it the
can
next
list
meeting.
both agencies. That's how I would view this.
Yeah, let's think about that.
Think about it, I mean...
I just think it's
I think that would be fair.
it's a lot to
Right,
ask
you're
of the
listing Town of
public.
East Hampton,
I
Town
The
of
way
East
it is
Hampton
now.
simplify a lot of
trustees.
these things.
It's clear
I have
that there are
no
two
doubt.
agencies on
But I
one
don't want to
permit.
lose
No, and
focus
Town
on
should
the big picture where we are involved,
And just
where
so
the
you-
beaches are.
And just so
I
you
wouldn't
know,
want to have this discussion if I thought that was
yeah,
the case.
and just so you know, there's no revenue associated with
Right.
our permit fee, so it's not like we're losing revenue.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Francis.
Let's see what else we have here. Pump-out boat operators returning for the season. Sid Bai's going to look for an assistant. If anybody knows anybody who would
What about
fit
that gentleman who used to do it years ago I met up in,
He came to us earlier this year and then hasn't come back yet, so I don't know.
This is still
I mean, he came way too soon.
Sure.
But,
I had myself going to bed.
let's see what else we have here.
well, there's,
Letter from Ron Delsner, I think everybody got?
Yes.
Okay.
What are the hours of that pump-out boat
You get one?
operator? Is that a 40-hour
should be in your folder.
thing, or?
No, I didn't get one.
it's,
I didn't get one either.
Everybody got one.
I think it's
Oh,
part-time.
that I have. I thought you meant the pump out time.
Do they put a cap on the number of hours? What's the pump out during the week?
Oh, here it is.
The person you're hiring, they're looking to hire?
So I picked all my
That is
stuff
you guys
up
from
early.
Montauk coming in 3 days, Friday, maybe doing 2 days a week, Tuesday and Wednesday, 8 to 4. And then maybe weekends, 3 to 8, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Or Saturday, Sunday. There's a little flexibility. And then
3 to 8 on the weekends and 8 to 4, 2 days in the week?
Yeah.
And we gave them a raise. So I think they're up to, what, $22 an hour, if my memory serves
And
me
he can
correct?
work up
I
to
don't
30
remember
hours.
exactly what it is.
They can work up to 30 hours, the part-time.
Up to 30 hours, okay.
And just one reminder, our May 28th meeting is moved to June 1st. In the annual resolutions, May 28th is Memorial Day, so we approved moving any holidays to the following Friday.
following
So
Friday.
it's June 1st.
Yeah. And other correspondence, we have notification from the Water for Long Island organization of a free seminar to be given entitled 2018 Protect Your Aquifer Today. And that will be held May 3rd and 4th.
May 3rd and 4th, and where is it to be?
Trying to find out. On the 3rd, it's at Longwood Public Library, and on May 4th, it's the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Shelter Rock in Manhasset. All right.
I hate to cross over the Shinnecock.
Letter from Atlantic Offshore Lobstermen's Association. Concerns of the local fishing community re the proposed South Fork Wind Farm. So that's, everybody got a copy of that also?
What letter was that?
I think that was a while ago. Yeah, we have that.
Yeah, that was last.
We got this, it was red also.
Little Anthony.
Little Anthony.
We got it last meeting, I think we had
Hey,
it.
he wrote it at the
library.
GGG thing.
At the GGG thing at the library.
And then he sent it to us, and he sent it to general publication, yeah.
Yeah, but I think Lori, you didn't know.
Okay, I'll check.
All right, and there was public notice, request for written comments on proposed shellfish aquaculture lease sites from the county, Suffolk County, outside trustee jurisdiction, but,
CC that to the Devon Yacht Club?
yeah.
Is that, are they asking for comments on that specific?
Request for written comments on proposed shellfish aquaculture lease sites.
They give you lots of moms in
Is that for the Gardener's Bay site or for
there? Yeah,
just general?
It's, I think it's all, you know, whatever they have
A lot
available.
of them, here it is.
You know, there's North Haven.
Oh, this is for, I guess, new applicants, right?
Shellfish
Yes.
leases, yeah.
Newly chosen sites.
Not the ones in.
What is Robin Valley?
That may require a look, deeper look.
I heard, I'm of the understanding they put a hold on the Gardener's Bay site.
Wouldn't surprise
On
me.
the Devon?
The whole string,
Because?
because I think it's in litigation.
Yeah, they're being sued by Devon. Yeah.
With all due respect.
Well, it's here, yeah.
It's in your
Yes.
office, if there's any specific.
All right, does anybody have anything else?
No, I'd like to make a motion.
Second?
We have a motion to close,
Motion,
seconded.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody.
Susan, would you share that with,